Hello, all you beautiful people out there. My name is Michael Senes. I'm super excited to talk about my favorite book of all time. Literally the most important book I've ever read. The only thing that comes close to it is The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is a history of money, the banking system, and where we're headed in terms of finances. This deals with education and the fact that the financial structure in place now, the same people that designed that designed our education system. So they're kind of like lock and key. They go together. Everyone has direct personal experience with the education system, and then I have another lecture on the financial system. Obviously, the financial system, there's a lot more moving parts, so it's a bit longer. As kind of a warm up to that, I would definitely recommend getting yourself familiar with the education system. But it's totally up to you to choose. If you want to go deep into the financial system first and then check out the education, you can do that. By all means, this is one of the most important books I've ever read, if not the most important book. You were a genius. The premise of this book, in a few words, you are a genius and school told you you weren't. That's the premise of this book. You're a genius. Like, this is me talking. I promise you, you're a genius and school made you think you are not. Or it made you think you were really smart and now you're somewhere and you don't feel so smart. So what happened? What happened in school that robbed us of happiness, creativity, inspiration, freedom? What happened? That's what this book explains. Why did it happen? Why? Why did it happen? That's what this book explains. I'm going to tell you really quick about the author. His name's John Taylor Gatto. A little blurb about this beautiful, beautiful man. John Taylor Gatto is a renowned speaker, having lectured about education in all 50 states and 9 countries. He taught for 30 years in public schools and was twice awarded New York State Teacher of the Year. Mr. Gatto resigned from school teaching in the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal because he no longer wanted to, quote, hurt kids to make a living. Demonstrating unsurpassed bravery in his condemnation of government monopoly compulsory schooling, he is known as, quote, the world's most courageous teacher. He is the author of A Different Kind of Teacher, The Exhausted School, Dumbing Us Down, Weapons of Mass Instruction, having sold over 200,000 copies. Homie John Taylor Gatto truly is the most courageous teacher of the year. So he was a teacher in New York City for 30 years. For 30 years. So we'll talk about it in the book, but he realizes about 2 years into teaching that it's messed up. That it is messed up to the core. He stays in only to figure out why it's so messed up. After 30 years, he realizes he knows enough and he needs to leave and educate the world about what's really happening inside a prison school system. It's a prison camp. Our school systems are prison camps designed to rob your children of everything they innately have. If you're excited to remember that you're an actual genius and that you can do anything you want, and there's literally just countless forces working against you, working to make sure that you don't remember these innate human rights and human facts, please listen on. I'm here today with Gabriela Gonzalez. We have some really beautiful discussions about this book, about the education system and the history of school, some ideas on where it's headed. I hope you enjoy, and I hope this helps you remember.
Moving forward, this is something really cool to keep in mind. We must be prepared to insult systems for the convenience of humanity and not the other way around.
Yeah.
So we can't insult humanity for the convenience of systems. It's not like,
right.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
Like, humanity needs to be the focus.
Yeah.
Bianca, you animals, shut up. Our problem in understanding forced schooling stems from an inconvenient fact that the wrong it does from a human perspective is right from a system's perspective. You can see this in the case of 6-year-old Bianca, who came to my attention because an assistant principal screamed at her in front of an assembly, "Bianca, you animal, shut up." Like the wail of a banshee, this sang the school doom of Bianca. Even though her body continued to shuffle around, the voodoo had poisoned her. Do I make too much of this simple act of putting a little girl in her place? It must happen thousands of times every day in schools all over. I've seen it many times, and if I were painfully honest, I'd admit to doing it many times. Schools are supposed to teach kids their place. That's why we have age-graded classes. In any case, it wasn't your own little Janie or mine. Most of us tacitly accept the pragmatic terms of public school, which allow every kind of psychic violence to be inflicted on Bianca in order to fulfill the prime directive of the system, putting children in their place. It's called social efficiency. But I get this precognition, this flash forward to a moment far in the future, when your little girl Jane, having left her comfortable home, wakes up to a world where Bianca is her enraged meter maid, or the passport clerk Jane counts on for her next emergency ticket out of the country, or the strange lady who lives next door. I picture this animal Bianca grown large and mean, the same Bianca who didn't go to school for a month after her little friends took to whispering, "Bianca is an animal, Bianca is an animal." While Bianca, only seconds earlier, a human being like themselves, sat choking back tears, struggling her way through a reading selection by guessing what the words meant. In my dreams, I see Bianca as a fiend manufactured by schooling who now regards Jane as a vehicle for vengeance. In a transport of passion, she 1, gives Jane's car a ticket before the meter runs out, 2, throws away Jane's passport application after Jane leaves the office, 3, plays heavy metal music through the thin partition which separates Bianca's apartment from Jane's, while Jane pounds frantically on the wall for relief, 4, all of the above. You aren't compelled to loan your car to anyone who wants it. Gabby, this is crazy. You aren't compelled to loan your car to anyone who wants it, but you are compelled to surrender your school-aged child to strangers who process children for a livelihood, even though 1 in every 9 school children is terrified of physical harm happening to them in school, and terrified with good cause. About 33 are murdered there every year. From 1992 through 1999, so that's 8 years, 262 children were murdered in school in the United States. Your great-great-grandmother didn't have to surrender her children. What happened? If I demanded you give up your television to an anonymous, itinerant repairman who needed work, you'd think I was crazy. If I came with a policeman who forced you to pay that repairman, even after he broke your set, you would be outraged. Why are you so docile when you give up your child to a government agent called a school teacher? I want to open up concealed aspects of modern schooling, such as the deterioration it forces and the morality of parenting. You have no say at all in choosing your teachers. You know nothing about their backgrounds or families, and the state knows little more than you do. This is as radical a piece of social engineering as the human imagination can conceive. What does it mean? One thing you do know is how unlikely it will be for any teacher to understand the personality of your particular child, or anything significant about your family, culture, religion, plans, hopes, and dreams. In the confusion of school affairs, even teachers so disposed don't have opportunity to know those things. How did this happen? Before you hire a company to build a house, you would, I expect, insist on detailed plans showing what the finished structure was going to look like. Building a child's mind and character is what public schools do. Their justification for prematurely breaking family and neighborhood learning. Where is documentary evidence to prove this assumption that trained and certified professionals do it better than people who know and love them can? There isn't any. The cost in New York State for building a well-schooled child in the year 2000 is $200,000 per body when lost interest is calculated. That capital sum invested in the child's name over the past 12 years would have delivered $1 million to each kid as a nest egg to compensate for having no school. The original $200,000 is more than the average home in New York cost. You wouldn't build a home without some idea what it would look like when finished, but you are compelled to let a corpse of perfect strangers tinker with your child's mind and personality without the foggiest idea what they want to do with it. Oh my God, this is crazy. Law courts and legislatures have totally absolved school people from liability. You can sue a doctor for malpractice, but not a school teacher. Every home builder is accountable to customers years after the home is built, not school teachers though. You can't sue a priest, minister, or rabbi either, and that should be a clue. If you can't be guaranteed even minimal results by these institutions, not even physical safety, if you can't be guaranteed anything except that you'll be arrested if you fail to surrender your kid, just what does the public in public schools mean? What exactly is public about public schools? That's a question to take seriously. If schools were public as libraries, parks, and swimming pools are public, as highways and sidewalks are public, then the public would be satisfied with them most of the time. Instead, a situation of constant dissatisfaction has spanned many decades. Only in Orwell's Newspeak, as perfected by legendary spin doctors of the 20th century, such as Ed Bernays or Ivy Lee, or great advertising combines, is there anything public about public schools. Did you ever read 1984?
Yeah.
George Orwell's?
Yeah,
Do you remember
yeah.
Newspeak? Basically make words meaningless by putting doubles. Dude, you see it so much with coronavirus, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The double negatives of shit.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Do you hear about Lincoln's childhood?
Yeah.
And how he self-educated
Yeah.
himself? He acquired much of his early education at home. In the evening, he would pile sticks of dry wood into the brick fireplace. These would blaze up brightly and shed a strong light over the room, and the boy would lie down flat on the floor before the hearth with his book in front of him. He used to write his arithmetic sums on a large wooden shovel with a piece of charcoal. After covering it all over with examples, he would take his jackknife and whittle and scrape the surface clean, ready for more ciphering. Paper was expensive, and he could not afford a slate. Sometimes when the shovel was not at hand, he did his figuring on the logs of the house walls and on the doorposts, and other woodwork that afforded a surface he could mark on with his charcoal. Young people in America, this is not a quote anymore. Young people in America were expected to make something of themselves. Dude, this is kind of what it comes down to. Young people in America, were expected to make something of themselves, not to prepare themselves to fit into a pre-established hierarchy. Every foreign commentator notes the early training in independence, the remarkable precuriosity of American youth, their assumption of adult responsibility. In his memoir, Tom Nichols, a New Hampshire schoolboy in the 1820s, recalls the electrifying air of expectation in early American schools. Our teachers constantly stimulated us by glittering prizes of wealth, honors, offices, and distinctions, which were certainly within our reach. There were 100 avenues to wealth and fame opening fair before us if we only chose to learn our lessons. Overproduction, overcapacity would have been an alien concept to that America, something redolent of British mercantilism. Our virgin soil and forest undermined the stern doctrine of Calvinism by paying dividends to anyone willing to work. As Calvinism waned, contrarian attitudes emerged which represented a new American religion. First, the conviction that opportunity was available to all. Second, that failure was the result of deficient character, not predestination or bad placement on a biological bell curve. Character flaws could be remedied, but only from the inside. You had to do it yourself through courage, determination, honesty, and hard work. Don't discount this as hot air. It marks a critical difference between Americans and everyone else. Teachers had a place in this process of self-creation, but it was an ambiguous one. Anyone could teach, it was thought, just as anyone could self-teach. Secular schools, always a peripheral institution, were viewed with ambivalence. Although teachers were granted some value, if only gratitude for giving mother a break. In the southern and middle colonies, teachers were often convicts serving out their sentences. Their place in the social order caught in the advertisement of Washington's day. Ran away, a servant man who followed the occupation of schoolmaster, much given to drinking and gambling. Washington's own schoolmaster hobby was just such a bondsman. Traditional lore has it that he laid the foundation for national greatness by whipping the devil out of Washington. Whipping and humiliation seem to have always been an eternal staple of schooling. Evidence survives from an ancient Rome, Montague's France, Washington's Virginia, or my own high school in Western Pennsylvania in the 1950s, where the teacher's personalized paddle hung prominently at the entrance to many a classroom, not for decoration but for use. The football coach, and if I call correctly, the algebra teacher, customized their paddles. using a dry cell battery to fashion devices similar to electrified cattle prods. Something in the structure of schooling calls forth violence. While latter-day schools don't allow energetic physical discipline, certainly they are state-of-the-art laboratories in humiliation, as your own experience should remind you. In my first years of teaching, I was told over and over that humiliation was my best friend and was more effective than whipping. I witnessed this theory in practice through my time as a teacher. If you were to ask me now whether physical or psychological violence does more damage, I would reply that slurs, aspersion, formal ranking, insult, and inference are far and away the more deadly. Nor does law protect the tongue-lashed. Homie, this is sick. It's called The Art of Driving.
Okay.
So the art of driving. Now come back to the present while I demonstrate that the identical trust placed in ordinary people 200 years ago still survives where it suits managers of our economy to allow it. Consider the art of driving, which I learned at the age of 11. Without everybody behind the wheel, our sort of economy would be impossible. So everybody is there, IQ notwithstanding. With less than 30 hours of combined training and experience, 100 million people are allowed access to vehicular weapons more lethal than pistols or rifles. Turn loose without a teacher, so to speak. Why does our government make such presumptions of competence, placing nearly unqualified trust in drivers while it maintains such a tight grip on near monopoly state schooling? An analogy will illustrate just how radical this trust really is. Gabby, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
What if I proposed that we hand 3 sticks of dynamite and a detonator to anyone who asked for them? All an applicant would need is money to pay for the explosives. You'd have to be an idiot to agree with my plan, at least based on the assumptions you picked up in school about human nature and human competence. And yet gasoline, a spectacularly mischievous explosive, dangerously unstable, and with the intriguing, and with the intriguing characteristic as an assault weapon that it can flow under locked doors and saturate bulletproof clothing, is available to anyone with a container. 5 gallons of gasoline have the destructive power of 1 stick of dynamite. The average tank holds 15 gallons, yet no background check is necessary for dispenser or dispensee. As long as gasoline is freely available, gun control is beside the point. Push on. Why do we allow access to a portable substance capable of incinerating houses, torching crowded theaters, or even turning skyscrapers into infernos? We haven't even considered the battering ram aspect of cars. Why are novice operators allowed to command a ton of metal capable of hurtling through school crossings at up to 2 miles a minute? Why do we give the power and life of death this way to everyone? It should strike you at once that our unstated official assumptions about human nature are dead wrong. Nearly all people are competent and responsible, and universal motoring proves that. We all have fat bombs on us right now.
Whoa.
We can
Yeah,
teach
if we can teach
ourselves,
ourselves
bro. If we can,
that.
if we can not blow each other, bro.
Right.
We have gas. We have we're at the beginning, bro.
Yeah.
It's so simple. It's so simple. It's the simplest thing.
It is. Wow. I've never looked at it that way.
The efficiency of motor vehicles as terrorist instruments would have written a tragic record long ago if people were inclined to terrorism. But almost all auto mishaps are accidents, and while there are seemingly a lot of those, the actual fraction of mishaps, when held up against the stupendous number of possibilities for mishap, is quite small. I know it's difficult to accept this because the specter of global terrorism is a favorite cover story of our governments. Oh my god, dude, this next part, but the truth is substantially different from the tale the public is sold. According to the U.S. State Department, 1995 was a near record year for terrorist murders. It saw 300 worldwide, 200 at the hand of the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. Homie, 300 people died from terrorism
Okay.
in 1995
Okay.
compared to 400,000 smoking-related deaths in the United States alone. When we consider our assumptions about human nature that keep children in a condition of confinement and limited options, we need to reflect on driving and things like almost non-existent global terrorism.
Yeah.
Bro, 300 people in 1995.
Right.
And most of them were from Sri Lanka.
Yeah, and that's what's focused on.
And that was all it was focused on. Not the smoking deaths, not the suicide deaths,
Right.
not the
stuff that's actually taking people out constantly.
Notice how quickly people learn to drive. Every failure is efficiently corrected, usually self-corrected, because the terrific motivation of staying alive and in one piece steers driving improvement. If the grand theories of Comenius and Herbert about learning by incremental revelation, or those calls for precision and human ranking of Thorndike and Hall, or those nuanced interventions of Yale, Stanford, and Columbia Teachers College, were actually as essential as their proponents claimed, their libertarian miracle of motoring would be unfathomable. So basically, like, he's saying all the people that, like, kids need to learn, like, one year at a time, one grade at a time, or else they would die. Like, it would overwhelm them. Homie, you get in a car, and if you fuck up, you're dead. Like, you instantly have to learn how to, like, finesse that.
Right.
And the survival teaches you that.
Yeah.
Homie, so if you leave school, you're faced with survival. Like, once you're out of school, you're faced with the same as a car, you're faced with survival.
Yeah.
And you're instantaneously,
You pick it up.
you pick the path that is best for you. But if you stay in school, like, you're on someone else's path, and you're getting in someone, and you wonder, like,
you train
why
your
am
brain to stop listening to your instinct.
Now consider the intellectual component of driving. It isn't all just hand-eye foot coordination. First-time drivers make dozens, no hundreds, of continuous hypotheses, plans, computations, and fine-tuned judgments every day they drive. They do this skillfully without being graded, because if they don't, organic provision exists in the motoring universe to punish them. There isn't any court of appeal from your own stupidity on the road. Homie, we don't need to be graded because we grade ourselves. We're living.
Yeah.
We're trying to survive. We
Right.
naturally reflect upon ourselves.
Exactly.
We don't need to be graded by someone else telling us we're fucking up.
Right.
Because we're never fucking up if we're listening to ourselves.
Right.
If we make mistakes, it's a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
But if other people are telling us we're making mistakes, we're not learning from it. Because other people are telling us we're making the mistakes. We
Yeah.
don't see the mistake in it.
Right.
We see their version of the mistake.
Or we don't see, like, the lesson. It's
We
just
don't see the lesson. It's just something we get punished for.
Yeah,
we fucked up.
We did wrong.
We did
Something
wrong.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to look at the root of why you did wrong. You just need to fix it.
Yeah.
It just wasn't the right
Stop
thing. Like,
doing
just
that.
stop doing that chain. Like, I could go on. Think of licensing, maintenance, storage, adapting machine and driver to seasons and daily conditions. Carefully analyzed driving is as impressive a miracle as walking, talking, or reading. But this only shows the inherent weakness of analysis, since we know almost everyone learns to drive well in a few hours. The way we used to be as Americans, learning everything, breaking down social class barriers, is the way we might be again without forced schooling, and driving proves this. This section's called the Schools of Hellas. Wherever it occurred, schooling through the 18th and 19th centuries, up until the last third of the 19th, heavily invested its hours with language, philosophy, art, and the life of the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. In the grammar schools of the day, little pure grammar as we understand it existed. They were places of classical learning. Early America rested easily on a foundation of classical understanding, one subversive to the normal standards of British class society. The lessons of antiquity were so vital to the construction of every American institution, it's hardly possible to grasp how deep the gulf between then and now is without knowing a little bit about those lessons. So prepare yourself for a surprise. For a long time, for instance, classical Athens distributed its most responsible public positions by lottery. Dude, what? For a long time, for instance, classical Athens distributed its most responsible public positions by lottery. Army generalships, water supply, everything. The implications were awesome. Trust in everyone's competence was assumed. It was their version of universal driving. Professionals existed but did not make key decisions. They were only technicians, never well regarded because prevailing opinion held that technicians had enslaved their own minds. Anyone worthy of citizenship was expected to be able to think clearly and to welcome great responsibility. As you reflect on this, remember our own unvoiced assumption that anyone can guide a ton of metal traveling at high speed with 3 sticks of dynamite sloshing around in the tanks. When we ask what kind of schooling was behind this brilliant society, When we ask what kind of schooling was behind this brilliant society, which has enchanted the centuries ever since, any honest reply can be carried in one word: none.
No schooling.
After writing a book, searching... Bro, this is ridiculous. After writing a book searching for the hidden genius of Greece in its schools, Kenneth Freeman concluded his unique study, The Schools of Hellas, in 1907 with this summary. Can you imagine writing a whole book called The Schools of Hellas, and then the last page of the book, this is what the dude wrote: there were no schools in Hellas.
Wow.
No place boys and girls spent their youth attending continuous instruction under command of strangers. Indeed, nobody did homework in the modern sense. None could be located on standardized tests. The test that mattered came in living, striving to meet ideals that local tradition imposed. The word school, S-K-O-L-E, itself means leisure. Leisure in a form... Homie! He knows it. He knows it's the best part. The word school itself means leisure. Leisure in a formal garden to think and reflect. Plato in the Laws is the first to refer to school as learned discussion between two individuals in a garden. The most famous school in Athens was Plato's Academy, but in its physical dude, this is crazy. The most famous school in Athens was Plato's Academy, but in its physical manifestation, it had no classes or bells, was a well-mannered hangout for thinkers and seekers, a generator of good conversation and good friendship. Things Plato thought lay at the core of education. Today, we might call such a phenomenon a saloon. Aristotle's Lyceum was pretty much the same, although Aristotle delivered 2 lectures a day. Oh, this is so cool. He delivered a tough lecture in the morning for intense thinkers, and then he did a kinder, gentler version of the same in the afternoon for less ambitious minds.
Wow.
Attendance was optional, and the famous gymnasium, so memorable as a forge for German leadership later on, was in reality only an open training ground where men 16 to 50 were free to participate in high-quality, state-subsidized instruction in boxing, wrestling, and javelin. The idea of schooling free men in anything would have revolted Athenians. Forced training was for slaves.
Yeah.
Forced training was for slaves.
Yeah.
Among free men, learning was self-discipline, not the gift of experts. From such notions, Americans derived their own academies, the French their lycees, and the Germans their gymnasium. Think of it. In Athens, instruction was unorganized even though the city-state was surrounded by enemies and its own society engaged in the difficult social experiment of sustaining a participatory democracy, extending privileges without precedent to citizens, and maintaining literacy, artistic, and legislative standards which remain to this day benchmarks of human genius. For its 500-year history, from Homer to Aristotle, Athenian civilization was a miracle in a rude world. Teachers flourished there, but none was grounded in fixed buildings with regular curricula under the thumb of an intricately layered bureaucracy. There were no schools in Hellas. For the Greeks, study was its own reward.
Okay, this is a really cool section. It's called How Hindu Schooling Came to America. So how Hindu schooling came to America, England, Germany, and France at just about the same time is a story which has never been fully told. A full treatment is beyond the scope of this book, but I'll tell you enough to set you wondering how an Asiatic device specifically intended to preserve a caste system came to reproduce itself in the early republic, protected by influentials of the magnitude of Clinton and Eddy. Even a brief dusting off of schooling's Hindu provenance should warn you that what you know about American schooling isn't much. First, a quick gloss on the historical position of India at the time of the American Revolution. for Lancaster schools were in New York 2 decades after that. India fell victim to Western dominance through nautical technology in the following fashion. When medieval Europe broke up after its long struggle to reconcile emergent science with religion, 5 great ocean powers appeared to compete for the wealth of the planet: Portugal, Spain, France, and the Netherlands, and England. Portugal was the first to sail for treasure, leaving colonies in India, China, and South America, but its day in the sun was short. Spain emerged as the next global superpower, but after 1600, her character decayed rapidly from the corrupting effects of the gold of the Americas, which triggered a long national decline. The Netherlands' turn followed, because that nation had the advantage of a single-minded commercial class in control of the things with one aim in mind: wealth. The Dutch monopolized the carrying trade of Europe with globe-trotting merchant ships and courageous military seamanship. Yet, as with Portugal before it, the Dutch population was too small, its internal resources too anemic for its dominance to extend very long. Beginning in the 17th century, England and France gradually built business in the East, both balked for a time by the Dutch, who controlled the spice trade of the Indies. 3 naval wars with the Dutch made the Royal Navy master of the seas, in the process developing tactics of sea warfare that made it dominant for the next 2 centuries. So by 1700, only France and England remained as global sea powers with impressive fighting capability. And during the last half of that century, these giants slugged it out directly in Canada, India, and in the territory which is today the United States, with the result that France went permanently into eclipse. So in India, the two are the British and the French. They contended through their commercial pseudopedia. The British and the French East Indian companies each maintained a private army to war on the other for tea, indigo, turmeric, ginger, oilseeds, silk, and that product which most captivated British merchants with its portability and breakaway profit potential: opium. So at Plassey, Chandernagore, Madras, and Wandiwash, this long corporate rivalry ended. The French abandoned India to the British. The drug monopoly was finally England. So out of this experience and the observations of a wealthy young Anglican chaplain in India, the formula for modern schooling was discovered. Perhaps it was no more than coincidence this fellow held his first gainful employment as a school teacher in the United States. On the other hand, perhaps his experience in a nation which successfully threw off British shackles sensitized him to the danger of an educated population poses to plutocracies. So don't worry if that kind of went over your head. I mean, I know it's some history that you're probably not too familiar with or haven't brushed up on recently, but that's just you need to understand that background of who had influence in India and specifically this guy that we're about to talk about. But yeah, so that's all going to make a lot more sense in a second. So, Andrew Bell, the gentleman in question. He used to be described in old editions of the Britannica as, quote, cold, shrewd, and self-seeking. He might not have been the most pious cleric. However, like his contemporary, Parson Malthus, he didn't really believe in God at all. But as a young man following the flag, he had an eye out for the main chance. Bell found his opportunity when he studied the structure Hindus arranged for training the lower castes. And if you don't remember, about 95% of the Indian population is the lower class. So what does that mean? Mass production is starting. With mass production, you need an infinite number of slaves. The Hindu caste system gives you 95% slaves. So this dude was like, all right, let's figure out how to do this wherever I want. So Bell was fascinated by the purposeful nature of Hindu schooling. It seemed eminently compatible with the goals of the English state church. So, as many other ambitious young men have done throughout history, when he stumbles upon a little-known novelty, he swiped it. Before we turn to the details of the Hindu method and how Bell himself was upstaged by an ambitious young Quaker who beat him into the school market with a working version of Bell's idea, you should understand a little about Hindu religion. So after the British military conquest of India, in reality a merchant conquest, nothing excited the popular mind and the well-bred mind alike more than Hindu religion with its weird, to Western eyes, idols and rituals. Close analysis of Sanskrit literature seemed to prove that some kind of biological and social link had existed between the all-conquering Aryans, from whom the Hindus had descended, and Anglo-Saxons, which might explain theological similarities between Hinduism and Anglicanism. The possibilities suggested by this connection eventually provided a powerful psychic stimulus for creation of class-based schooling in the United States. Of course, such a development then lay far in the future. So the caste system of Hinduism or Brahmanism is the Anglican class system pushed to its imaginative limits. So it's a 5-category ranking, each category further subdivided, and apportions people into a system similar to that found in modern schools. Prestige and authority are reserved for the 3 highest castes, although they only comprise 5% of the total. Inescapable servility is assigned to the lowest class, a pariah group outside serious consideration. In the Hindu system, one may fall into a lower caste, but one cannot rise. When the British began to administer India, Hindus represented 70% of a population well over 100 million. Contrast this with an America of perhaps 3 million. That's crazy. So Hindu caste systems look like this. The upper 5% were divided into 3 twice-born groups. So the Brahmins, they were priests and those trained for law, medicine, teaching, and other professional occupations. Number 2, the warrior and the administrative class, and 3, the industrial caste, which would include land cultivators and mercantile groups. So that's all the upper 5%. The lower 95% was divided into 1, the menial caste, and 2, the pariahs called untouchables. So that's it. Those are your 5 groups. You have the Brahmins, the warrior and the administrative caste, and the industrial caste. And those 3 groups make up the top 5%. And all the real power is in number 1, the Brahmins, which makes up, the 0.1% of the 0.1%. And then you have 95% in the menial and the pariahs. The entire purpose of Hindu schooling and our schooling was to preserve the caste system. Only the lucky 5% received an education which gave perspective on the whole, a key to understanding. So in actual practice, warriors, administrators, and most of the other leaders were given much diluted insight into the driving energies of the culture, so that policy could be kept in the hands of the Brahmins. But what of the others, the quote-unquote masses, as Western socialist tradition would come to call them, and an echoing tribute to the Hindu class idea? The masses. Whoa, that's scary. The answer to that vital question launched factory schooling in the West. What brings us back to Andrew Bell. So Bell noticed that in some places, Hinduism had created a mass schooling institution for children of the ordinary, one inculcating a curriculum of self-abnegation and willing servility. In these places, hundreds of children were gathered in a single gigantic room, divided into phalanxes of 10 under the direction of student leaders, with the whole ensemble directed by a Brahmin. In the Roman manner, paid pedagogues drilled underlings in the memorization and imitation of desired attitudes, and these underlings drilled the rest. Here was a social technology made in heaven for the factories and mines of Britain, still uncomfortably saturated in older yeoman legends of liberty and dignity, one not yet possessing the perfect proletarian attitudes mass production must have for maximum efficiency. Nobody in the early years of British rule had made a connection between this Hindu practice and the pressing requirements of an industrial future. Nobody, that is, until a 34-year-old Scotsman arrived in India as military chaplain. With all that background, this is how Hindu schooling came to America. Young Bell was a go-getter. 2 years after he got to India, he was superintendent of the male orphan asylum of Madras. In order to save money, Bell decided to try the Hindu system he had seen and found it led students quickly to docile cooperation like parts of a machine. Furthermore, they seemed relieved to not have to think, grateful to have their time reduced to rituals and routines, as Frederick Taylor was to reform the American workplace 100 years later. In 1797, Bell, now 42, published an account of what he had seen and done. Pulling no punches, he praised Hindu drill as an effective way to slow learning and ciphering, and effective control on reading development. A 20-year-old Quaker, Joseph Lancaster, read Bell's pamphlet, thought deeply on the method, and concluded, ironically, it would be a cheap way to awaken intellect in the lower classes, ignoring the Anglicans' observation and Hindu experience that it did just the opposite. So Lancaster began to gather poor children under his father's roof in Borough Road, London, to give them rudimentary instruction without a fee. Word spread and children emerged from every alley, dive, and garret, craving to learn. Soon 1,000 children were gathering in the street. The Duke of Bedford heard about Lancaster and provided him with a single enormous schoolroom and a few materials. The monitorial system, as it was called, promised to promote a mental counterpart to the productivity of factories. Transforming dirty ghetto children into an orderly army attracted many observers. The fact that Lancaster's school ran at tiny cost with only one employee raised interest too. Invitations arrived to lecture in surrounding towns where the Quaker expounded on what had now become his system. Lancaster schools multiplied under the direction of young men he personally trained. So talked about did the phenomenon become, it eventually attracted the attention of King George III himself, who commanded an interview with Joseph. So royal patronage followed on the stipulation that every poor child be taught to read the Bible. But with fame and public responsibility, another side of Lancaster showed itself. He became vain, reckless, and improvident. Interested noblemen bailed him out after he fell deeply in debt, and helped him found the British and Foreign School Society. But Lancaster hated being watched over and soon proved impossible to control. He left the organization his patrons erected, starting a private school which went bankrupt. By 1818, the Anglican Church, warming to Bell's insights that schooled ignorance was more useful than unschooled stupidity, set up a rival chain of factory schools that proved to be handwriting on the wall for Lancaster. In the face of this competition, he fled to America, where his fame and his method had already preceded him. Meanwhile, in England, the whole body of dissenting sects gave Lancaster vociferous public support, thoroughly alarming the state church hierarchy. Prominent church laymen and clergy were not unaware that Lancaster schools weren't playing by Hindu rules. The prospect of a literate underclass with unseemly ambitions was a window on a future impossible to tolerate. Bell had been recalled from his rectory in Dorset in 1807 to contest with Lancaster's use of Hindu schooling. So in 1811, he was named superintendent of an organization to oppose Lancaster's British and Foreign School Society, the National Society for Promoting the Education of the Poor in the Principles of the Established Church. Since those principles held that the poor were poor because the Lord wanted it that way, the context of the society's schooling leaves little about what we need to speculate. Bell was sent to plant his system in Presbyterian Scotland, while the patronage advantage of Bell's system schools contained and diminished the reach of Lancaster. For his services to the state, Bell was eventually buried in Westminster Abbey. So at first, Lancaster was welcomed warmly in the United States, but his affection for children and his ability to awaken pride and ambition in his changes made him ultimately unacceptable to important patrons who were much more interested in spreading Bell's dumbed-down method without its Church of England baggage attached. Fortunately for their schemes, Lancaster grew even more shiftless, unmethodical, and incapable of sustained effort or principled action. In the 20 years remaining of his life, Lancaster ranged from Montreal to Carcass, disowned by Quakers for reasons I've been unable to discover. He once declared it would be possible to teach illiterates to read fluently in 20 to 90 days, which is certainly true. At the age of 60, he was run over by a carriage in New York and died a few hours later. But while he died an outcast, his system outlived him, or at least the system bearing his name did, albeit more Bells than Lancasters. It accustomed an influential public to expect streets to be clear of the offspring of the poor and to expenditures of tax money to accomplish this end. That's crazy. So it accustomed an influential public to expect streets to be clear of the offspring of the poor and to expenditures of tax money to accomplish this end. That's nuts, y'all. The first Lancaster school was opened in New York City in 1806, and by 1829 the idea had spread to the Mexican state of Texas, with stops as far west as Cincinnati, Louisville, and Detroit. The governors of New York and Pennsylvania recommended general adoption to their legislatures. What exactly was a Lancaster school? Its essential features involved one large room stuffed with anywhere from 300 to 1,000 children under the direction of a single teacher. The children were seated in rows. The teacher was not there to teach, but to be a bystander and inspector. Students, ranked in a paramilitary hierarchy, did the actual teaching. What the master says should be done. When the pupils, as well as the schoolmaster, understand how to act and learn on the system, not the master's vague, discretionary, uncertain judgment, will be in practice. In common school, the authority of the master is personal, and the rod is his scepter. His absence is an immediate signal for confusion, but in a school conducted on my plan, when the master leaves the school, the business will go on as well in his absence as in his presence. Whoa. So to all those kids out there that aren't even in the classroom anymore, it's just all online, like, they did it. They don't even need the teacher now. They can literally use like one dude in front of a camera for like thousands and thousands of kids. So who's that? What does that dude represent? Like, think about what he represents. Who are you learning from? What are you learning? For how many years? Here, without forcing the matter, is our modern harbinger of future computerized instruction. In such a system, teachers and administrators are forbidden to depart from instructions elsewhere written. But while dumbing children down was the whole of the government school education in England, it was only part of the story in America, and a minor one until the 20th century.
Okay, so just a quick summary. So Andrew Bell, 2 years after coming to India, he was superintendent of a male orphanage.
Yeah.
He started to implement the Hindu schooling system as a way to save money and just control the kids. He found, quote, it led students quickly to docile cooperation, like parts of a machine. Furthermore, they seem relieved not to have to think, grateful to have their time reduced to rituals and routines. So Andrew Bell, kind of an asshole. Joseph Lancaster, huge homie.
Yeah.
He studied Andrew Bell's, just the Hindu system, and was all right, there's a way to take this and not make 95% into the peasants.
Yeah.
There's a way to get this schooling to teach the 5% Brahmins. We can basically educate the lower population to all the knowledge. Right. Everyone can handle all the knowledge. And he's like, this way might be the best way. So he starts to do that. He sets up the schools and he's really trying to actually educate the kids. Mm-hmm. The problem is that's not the king, the governments, the religions, they don't want that. It. So they have him blacklisted. He basically runs to America. They call in Andrew Bell and they're like, yo, we got it all established. All the parents are super with it, sending all their kids. We need you to flip it back to the Hindu. We need you to indoctrinate them to the 95%. He's like, I got you, homie. And does that in England. And then of course, it comes over here to America because Lancaster pulls up to America and America's like, bro, we want to be just like England. We want to industrial produce. So fuck you, get out of here.
Right.
Bell, get your ass over here. Bring that Hindu shit back. We want the Hindu back. When I was a schoolboy in Monongahela, I learned how Thomas Edison left school early because the school thought him feeble-minded. He spent his early years peddling newspapers. Just before the age of 12, he talked his mother into letting him work on trains as a train boy, a permission she gave him which would put her in jail right now. A train boy was apprentice of all work. Shortly afterwards, a printer gave Edison some old type he was about to discard, and the boy, successfully begging a corner for himself in a baggage car to set type, began printing a 4-page newspaper the size of a handkerchief about the lives of the passengers on the train and the things that could be seen from its window. At the age of 12, this dude was posted up in the back of a train car with like a little desk, just writing about the people, the stories about people that were in the car and what was happening in the world. Because school said he was too stupid. They're like, you're too dumb. Like, get out of here. Like,
So
go be a...
like, the newspaper.
So he created a news... Yeah. So he started creating. Like, that's what you do. When you're not in school, you create.
Yeah.
Like, several months later, 12-year-old Edison had 500 subscribers, earning a net profit monthly about 25% more than an average school teacher of the day made. He left school at 12 and just started making more than a teacher.
How long did it take before he was making it? Did it say?
Several months later. Just spent like a couple months. Yeah, bro. Like, you only need to spend a couple months.
Not a year. Literally just...
You need to spend a couple months
couple
of focused
months.
energy on yourself. When the Civil War broke out, the newspaper became a gold mine. Railroads had telegraph facilities, so war news was available to Edison as quickly as to professional journalists, but he could move it into print sooner than they could. He sold the war to crowds at the various stops. The Grand Trunk Herald sold as many as 1,000 extra copies after a battle at prices per issue from a dime to a quarter, amassing for Edison a handsome stake. Unfortunately, at the same time, he had been experimenting with phosphorus in the baggage car. One thing led to another, and Edison set the train on fire. Otherwise, there might have never been a light bulb. This 12-year-old was just making hand over fist money. Would have blown up, who knows, like never would have invented shit. Blows up the train. Like, loses all the money, loses everything, and has to, like, start from scratch again. Dude, anything could happen. Like, it's crazy, but that's the point, is that anything can happen, bro. So, yeah, this fucking battles me to my core, this next part, bro. When I was a schoolboy in Monongahela, I learned with a shock that the men who won our revolution were barely out of high school by the standards of my time. Hamilton was 20 in the retreat from New York. Burr was 21. Light Horse Harry Lee, 21. Lafayette was 19. What amounted to a college class rose up and struck down the British Empire, afterwards helping to write the most sophisticated governing documents in modern history. Homie, the world's always been changed by kids. Bro, college kids created America. And all they tried to pass on was like, do not slip back into the bullshit. Don't give away your responsibility. Don't give away your power.
Yeah.
Don't have a federal government, bro.
And that's what happened. Gave away our power.
We gave it all away for the comforts of TV and cheeseburgers. At the age of 5, when I entered the first grade, I could add, subtract, and multiply because Dad used to play numbers games with me and my sister in the car. He taught me the mastery of those skills within a matter of a few hours, not years and years as it took in school. We did all the calculations in our heads with such gusto I seldom use a pencil today, even for much more intricate computation. Pepe's verified my father's unstated premise. You can, bro, this is nuts, and I've told like a lot of people this is one of my favorite quotes in the book. You can learn what you need, even the technical stuff, at the moment you need it, or shortly before. You can learn what you need, even the technical stuff, at the moment you need it, or shortly before. Homie, Quentin Tarantino, he was a high school dropout. He worked in, did you know Quentin Tarantino dropped out of high school and he's in like 9th grade because the only thing he liked was history class because it was stories. He's like, Mom, this is fucked. Like, I'm leaving school. His mom was like, okay, but you need to get a job. Quentin Tarantino gets a job in an adult film theater. You know, like, it was back in the, because the only place to see porn, you had to like go to a theater.
Yeah.
So he gets a job in an adult film theater, like cleaning up the shit, walking around, like watching it. A couple years go by. He's like 17. He gets a job in like a DVD shop.
Okay.
Like levels up. So he works in this DVD shop. People would come in. He would just watch these movies, tell people about movies, just talking about movies all the time. He had a couple friends in the DVD shop. They got some like camera equipment, but everything, was film back then, so it was like way harder to film stuff.
Yeah.
They'd work all week, take their money, and then on the weekends they would go shoot this movie they were working on. And they did it for like 10 weeks. They would shoot scenes every weekend. So they finally finished shooting. Tarantino edited it all and is like, Jesus Christ, this is a piece of shit. But we had a crash course in like learning how to make a film. So like from that, they knew like all the different stuff to do. Yeah. So he didn't like start to film again, but he knew how to write a screenplay that could like be filmed successfully. So he writes Reservoir Dogs, and he goes to a barbecue in LA, and he's talking to this guy, and he's a producer, and he's pitching him Reservoir Dogs. He gives him like the 2-minute elevator pitch. And the dude's like, all right, I'm gonna see if I can get, he's like, I'm gonna see how much funding I can get you. He's like, I might be able to get you like $50,000 or something. Tarantino's like, bet, like for sure. So this dude goes back, he calls Tarantino a couple days later, and he's like, he either got him $250,000 or $1 million. He's like, I got you this budget, but the condition is you need to do a 2-week like crash course. Like Tarantino was like I want to direct it. Like I want to direct it no matter what. Like I'm not just selling it. Like I want to direct it. And they're like, okay, like we'll let you direct it, but you have to do a 2-week crash course on like how to be a director. He's like, okay, bet. And so he does a 2-week crash course, and then he directs Reservoir Dogs, one of like the best, in my opinion, one of the best like Tarantino movies. And then after that, it does Pulp Fiction. Like you can learn anything you need to know the moment before you need to know it.
You literally can. You can teach yourself anything.
You can teach yourself anything, like quick, because it's survival. That's how we're wired, is for survival. So we're not going to sit there for 5 years trying to figure something out. Right. We're going to figure it out quick. Yeah. I'm trying to decide. It's worth talking about Ben Franklin. Edison kind of explained it. Like a 12-year-old can do anything. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just, Ben Franklin's story is just basically the same, bro. He just leaves school and like does a bunch of shit on his own. Yeah.
It all starts when you
it all starts when you leave school.
When they tell you you're too dumb.
It all starts,
you can't do it.
You can't do it. Or you're gonna die without a degree. Like that's what they tell. You can't survive without a degree.
You're gonna be homeless.
You're gonna be homeless. It's gonna be really hard. It's gonna be really hard without a degree. All right, so George Washington, a good yardstick to measure how far modern schooling has migrated from the education of the past is George Washington's upbringing in the middle 18th century. Although Washington descended from important families, his situation wasn't quite the easeful life that suggests. The death of his father left him at 11 within the practice of primogeniture, which vested virtually the entire inheritance in his first son in order to stabilize social class, compelled Washington to either face the future as a ward of his brother, an unthinkable alternative for George, or take destiny into his own hands as a boy. Okay, so Washington's dad died when he was 11, and I guess the laws, like the social laws, all the money goes to the firstborn son. So his dad dies at 11, Washington's older brother immediately catches a ton of money and is like, all right, Washington, you're like my secretary for the rest of my life. Or he could dip the family and go at it on his own. So you probably already know how that story turned out, but since the course he pursued was nearly schoolless, its curriculum is worth a closer look. For the next few minutes, imagine yourself at school with Washington. George Washington was no genius. We know that from too many of his contemporaries to quibble. John Adams called him too illiterate, too unlearned, and too unread for his station and reputation. Jefferson, his fellow Virginian, declared he liked to spend time, quote, chiefly in action, reading little. It was at an age when everyone in Boston, even shoeblacks, knew how to read and count. It was a time when a working class boy in a family of 13, like Franklin, couldn't remember when he didn't know how to read. So, like, people were mad smart. Yeah. And Washington was dumb, bro. Wow. He was dumb. As a teenager, Washington loved two things. But see, this is where his like genius is. Yeah. As a teenager, Washington loved two things: dancing and horseback riding. He pursued both with a passion that paid off handsomely when he became president. How fucking crazy is all this, bro? He was a dancer and a horse rider, bro. That's how but so his dancing. An entertainer. Exactly. That's what you needed to like lead a nation, bro. You had to be artistic. You had to be like well-rounded. You couldn't just read. You had to know what it was like to be a person. So large in physical stature, his appearance might have stigmatized him as awkward. So yeah, he was super big too. I always forget that. Washington was really big. So normally that size, you're just awkward and like limpy. Yeah. Instead, by developing the agile strength of a dancer and equestrian, he was able to communicate grace through his commanding presence. Elan that counterpoised his large build at any gathering. Thanks to his twin obsessions, he met his responsibilities with the bearing of a champion athlete, which saved his life during the Revolution. In the midst of the fray, a British sharpshooter... Dude, this is crazy. In the midst of the fray, a British sharpshooter drew a bead on this target. Had Washington in his sights, but found himself unable to pull the trigger because Washington bore himself so magnificently on the horse. So whether that's true or not, some British dude was looking at Washington and was like, fuck, I literally can't shoot. He's
him.
like, I can't shoot him.
I
It's
can't
too
do
much.
it.
It's too much. Like,
I can't believe I never knew that. He was a dancer.
dude, and this is our first president. Why are we not simple
no.
shit that we don't know? Because do you understand the implications of understanding this?
Yes. He was like an artist and he wasn't good at
He didn't do anything in
But-
fuck school.
yeah.
Like, it's about people. It's about people. It's always been about people, bro. And school's the opposite. So George Mercer, a friend, described Washington as a young man in the following way. He said, he is straight as an Indian, measuring 6 feet 2 inches in his stockings and weighing 175 pounds. That's crazy, dude. I'm like the exact same
like
size
you.
as Washington. That's so funny. His frame is padded well with developed muscles, indicating great strength. British military superiority, including the best available war-making technology, would have made hash of a brainless commander in spite of his admirable carriage. So we need to analyze the curriculum which produced America's Fabius, as he is called. Homie, no public school in the United States is set up to allow another George Washington to happen. Washingtons in the bud stage are screened, browbeaten, or bribed to conform to a narrow outlook on social truth. Boys like Andrew Carnegie, who begged his mother not to send him to school and was well on his way to immortality and fortune at the age of 13, would be referred today for psychological counseling. Thomas Edison would find himself in special ed until his peculiar genius had been sufficiently tamed. Washington had no schooling until he was 11. No classroom confinement, no blackboards. He arrived at school already knowing how to read, write, and calculate about as well as the average college student today. If that sounds outlandish, turn back to Franklin's curriculum and compare it with the intellectual diet of a modern gifted and talented class. Full literacy wasn't unusual in the colonies or early republic. Many schools wouldn't admit students who didn't know reading and counting because few schoolmasters were willing to waste time teaching what was so easy to learn. Dude, you couldn't go to school till you know how to read and write. Because they're like, it's a fucking waste of time. It's not hard to learn how to read and write. There's so much more to discuss and do and talk about. It was deemed a mark of depraved character if literacy hadn't been attained by the student. Even the many charity schools operated by churches, towns, and philanthropic associations for the poor would have been flabbergasted at the great hue and cry raised today about difficulties teaching literacy.
So sometimes the best hiding place is right in the open. It took 7 years of reading and reflection for me to finally figure out that mass schooling of the young by force was a creation of the 4 great coal powers of the 19th century. It was under my nose, of course, but for many years I avoided seeing what was there because no one else seemed to notice. Forced schooling arose from the new logic of the industrial age, the logic imposed on flesh and blood by fossil fuel and high-speed machinery. So the 4 great coal powers, hopefully you already know, but that's just our banking system. The 4 great coal powers liquidated their money and then took over currency itself. And they continued to monopolize. They monopolized health with the pharmaceuticals, and they monopolized thinking itself with schools. So if you have no idea what the 4 great coal powers are and you have no idea what I'm talking about with the banks, please after this, listen to my lecture on finances. Or just read The Creature from Jekyll Island. But I know most people don't want to read a long book, so please, listen to my audio file on money and on banking and how to save yourself, honestly. This simple reality is hidden from view by early philosophical and theological anticipations of mass schooling in various writings about social order and human nature. But you shouldn't be fooled any more than Charles Francis Adams was fooled when he observed in 1880 that what was being cooked up for kids, unlucky enough to be snared by the newly proposed institutional school, net combined characteristics of the cotton mill and the railroad with those of a state prison. After the Civil War, utopian speculative analysis regarding isolation of children and custodial compounds where they could be subjected to deliberate molding routines began to be discussed seriously by the northeastern policy elites of business, government, and university life. These discussions were inspired by a growing realization that the productive potential of machinery driven by coal was limitless. Railroad development made possible by coal and startling new inventions like the telegraph seemed suddenly to make village life and local dreams irrelevant. A new governing mind was emerging in harmony with the new reality. But the surface appearance conceals philosophical visions approaching religious exaltation in intensity. That effective early indoctrination of all children would lead to an orderly scientific society, one controlled by the best people, now freed from the obsolete straitjacket of democratic traditions and historic American libertarian attitudes. Forced schooling was the medicine to bring the whole continental population into conformity with these plans so that it might be regarded as, quote, a human resource and managed as a, quote, workforce. No more Ben Franklin's or Thomas Edison's could be allowed. They set a bad example. One way to manage this was to see to it that individuals were prevented from taking up their working lives until an advanced age when the ardor of youth and its insufferable self-confidence had cooled. So extending childhood. From the beginning, there was purpose behind forced schooling, purpose which had nothing to do with its parents, kids, or communities wanted. Instead, this grand purpose was forged out of what a highly centralized corporate economy and system of finance, bent on internationalizing itself, was thought to need. That, and what a strong, centralized political state needed. School was looked upon from the first decade of the 20th century as a branch of industry and a tool of governance. For a considerable time, probably provoked by a climate of official anger and contempt directed against immigrants and the greatest displacement of people in history, social managers of schooling were remarkably candid about what they were doing. In a speech he gave before businessmen prior to the First World War, Woodrow Wilson made his unabashed disclosure. Quote, "We want one class to have a liberal education. We want another class, a very much larger class, of necessity to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks." By 1917, the major administrative jobs in American schooling were under the control of a group referred to in the press of that day as the Education Trust. The first meeting of this trust included representatives of Rockefeller, Carnegie, Harvard, Stanford, the University of Chicago, and the British Education Association. The chief end, wrote Benjamin Kidd, the British evolutionist, in 1918 was to, quote, impose on the young the ideal of subordination. So at first, the primary target was the tradition of independent livelihoods in America. Unless Yankee entrepreneurialism could be extinguished, at least among the common population, the immense capital investments that mass production industry required for equipment weren't conceivably justifiable. Students were to learn to think of themselves as employees competing for the favor of management, not as Franklin or Edison had once regarded themselves as self-determined free agents. Only by a massive psychological campaign could the menace of overproduction in America be contained. That's what important men and academics called it. The ability of Americans to think as independent producers had to be curtailed. Certain writings of Alexander Inglis carried a hint of schooling's role in this ultimately successful project to curb the tendency of little people to compete with big companies. From 1880 to 1930, overproduction became a controlling metaphor among the managerial class, and this idea would have a profound influence on the development of mass schooling. I know how difficult it is for most of us who mow our lawns and walk our dogs to comprehend that long-range social engineering even exists, let alone that it began to dominate compulsion schooling nearly a century ago. Yet the 1934 edition of Elwood P. Cubberley's Public Education in the United States is explicit about what happened and why. As Cubberley puts it, quote, "It has come to be desirable that children should not engage in productive labor. On the contrary, all recent thinking is opposed to their doing so. Both the interest of organized labor and the interests of the nation have set against child labor. So the statement occurs in a section of public education called, quote, a lengthening of the period of dependence, in which Cubberley explains that, quote, the coming of the factory system has made extended childhood necessary by depriving children of the training and education that farm and village life once gave. With the breakdown of home and village industries, the passing of chores, and the extinction of the apprenticeship system by large-scale production with the extreme division of labor, and the, quote, all-conquering march of machinery, an army of workers has arisen, said Cubberley, who know nothing. An army of workers has arisen who know nothing. Guys, that's what happened in Nazi Germany. Furthermore, modern industry needs such workers. Sentimentality could not be allowed to stand in the way of progress. According to Cubberley, with, quote, much ridicule from the public press, the old book subject curriculum was set aside, replaced by a change in purpose and a new psychology of instruction which came to us from abroad. That last mysterious reference to a new psychology is to its practices of dumbed-down schooling common to England, Germany, and France, the three major world coal powers, other than the United States, each of which had already converted its common population into an industrial proletariat. Arthur Colloon's 1919 Social History of the Family notified the nation's academics what was happening. Colloon declared that the fondest wish of utopian writers was coming true. The child was passing from its family, quote, into the custody of community experts. He offered a significant forecast that in time we could expect to see public education, quote, designed to check the mating of the unfit. 3 years later, Mayor John F. Hyland of New York said in a public speech that the schools had been seized as an octopus would seize prey by, quote, an invisible government. He was referring specifically to certain actions of the Rockefeller Foundation and other corporate interests in New York City, which preceded the school riots of 1917. He's talking about the Federal Reserve. If you don't know what that is, please listen to my lecture on money. It's the most important thing, along with this. The 1920s were a boom period for forced schooling as well as the stock market. In 1928, a well-regarded volume called A Sociological Philosophy of Education claimed, quote, it is the business of teachers to run not merely schools, but the world. A year later, the famous creator of educational psychology, Edward Thorndike of Columbia Teachers College, announced, quote, academic subjects are of little value. William Kirkpatrick, his colleague at Teachers College, boasted in Education and the Social Crisis that the whole tradition of rearing the young was being made over by experts. So the Genetics Manifesto. At the project offices of an important employer of experts, the Rockefeller Foundation, friends were hearing from Max Mason, its president, that a comprehensive national program was underway to allow, in Mason's words, quote, the control of human behavior. This dazzling ambition was announced on April 11, 1933. Schooling figured prominently in the design. Rockefeller had been inspired by the work of Eastern European scientist Hermann Mueller to invest heavily in genetics. Mueller had used X-rays to override genetic law, inducing mutations in fruit flies. This seemed to open the door to the scientific control of life itself. Mueller preached that planned breeding would bring mankind to paradise faster than God. His proposal received enthusiastic endorsement from the greatest scientists of the day, as well as from powerful economic interests. Mueller would win the Nobel Prize, reduce his proposal to a 1,500-word geneticist manifesto, and watch with satisfaction as 22 distinguished British and American biologists of the day signed it. The state must prepare to consciously guide human sexual selection, said Mueller. School would have to separate worthwhile breeders from those slated for termination. Just a few months before this report was released, an executive director of the National Education Association announced that his organization expected to, quote, accomplish by education what dictators in Europe are seeking to do by compulsion and force. You can't get much clearer than that. World War II drove the project underground, but hardly retarded its momentum.
Following cessation of global hostilities, school became a major domestic battleground for the scientific rationalization of social affairs through compulsory indoctrination. Great private corporate foundations led the way. Participatory democracy put to the sword. This is great. This next part is like really nuts because a ton of laws got changed in the education system like in the 60s and 70s. And so this like breaks down like how the laws got changed and like crazy stuff that got passed. Like crazy stuff that got passed.
So 30 odd years later, between 1967 and 1974, this is imperative. This is so important. So in a 7-year period, from 67 to 74, teacher training in the United States was covertly revamped through coordinated efforts of a small number of private foundations, select universities, global corporations, think tanks, and government agencies, all coordinated through the U.S. Office of Education and through key state education departments like those in California, Texas, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York. Important milestones for the transformation were number 1. So there's 3 different like laws basically that got passed. I'm going to just read the names of each law first and then we're going to look at them in depth. They're short, but geez, do they change a lot. It's really messed up. So important milestones of the transformation were number 1, an extensive government exercise in futurology called, quote, Designing Education for the Future. So 2, the Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project. And 3, Benjamin Bloom's multi-volume Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. An enormous manual of over 1,000 pages which, in time, impacted every school in America. While other documents exist, these 3 are appropriate touchstones of the whole, serving to make clear the nature of the project underway. So let's take them one by one and savor each. The first one, Designing Education. It's produced by the Education Department. And what it did is it redefined the term education after the Prussian fashions as, quote, a means to achieve important economic and social goals of a national character. Quote, a means to achieve important economic and social goals of a national character. They changed the definition of education. They changed it, dude. It used to be education was learning, like teaching yourself to think. And it got changed to, quote, a means to achieve important economic and social goals of a national character. So they changed the definition of education to match exactly what it is in the Hindu caste system. The untouchables, they have no rights. There's no independence. It's just do everything for the top 5%. State education agencies would henceforth act as on-site federal enforcers, ensuring the compliance of local schools with central directives. Each state education department was assigned the task of becoming, quote, an agent of change and advised to, quote, lose its independent identity as well as its authority in order to, quote, form a partnership with the federal government. That's crazy, dude. So the second document, the gigantic Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project, outlined teaching reforms to be forced on the country after 1967. Dude, this is crazy. John Gatto is such a G. He is such a homie. Guys, if you're near a computer, please look this up. Go to the U.S. Office of Education, and search for this document. Homie put the number in here for us just because this shit is so crazy. So if you ever want to hunt this thing down, the Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project, it bears the U.S. Office of Education contract number, capital OEC-093204244042, in parentheses B10. The document sets out clearly the intentions of its creators, nothing less than, quote, impersonal manipulation through schooling of a future America in which, quote, few will be able to maintain control over their opinions. An America in which each individual receives at birth a multi-purpose identification number, which enables employers and other controllers to keep track of underlings and to expose them to direct or subliminal influence when necessary. Readers learn that, quote, chemical experimentations on minors would be normal procedure in this post-1967 world, a pointed foreshadowing of the massive Ritalin interventions which now accompany the practice of forced schooling. Guys, that's the craziest thing in the world. That's the craziest thing in the world. An America in which, quote, few will be able to maintain control over their opinions. You literally can't have an opinion unless it's someone else's. Unless it's a Brahmin's opinion. The untouchables, they're just repeating and clamoring what the Brahmins feed them. And the debates are happening right now. Stop watching them. It's two sides of the same thing. You're watching the same thing. You're supporting the same evil. This needs to be changed from the ground up. Take your kids out of school. Please. I know a lot of you, they're already at home. You're letting them sit on the computer and they're just getting bullshit from a teacher. Like, talk to them or read to them. Don't have them sitting in front of a kindergartner in front of the computer for 6 hours. You're crazy. Talk to your kids, read to them. You should have done this a while ago, but now the world forced it upon you. There's no more time. You need to take back your kids and teach them. If you don't have money to do that right now, please listen to my financial lecture. It'll help you get so many resources, it's ridiculous. But you need to listen to it and you need to act upon it.
So that was one part of it. There's more to it. So the Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project identified the future as one, in quote, in which a small elite will control all important matters, one where participatory democracy will largely disappear. Children are made to see through school experiences that their classmates are so cruel and irresponsible, so inadequate to the task of self-discipline, and so ignorant they need to be controlled and regulated for society's good. Under such a logical regime, school terror can only be regarded as good advertising. It is sobering to think of mass schooling as a vast demonstration project of human inadequacy, but that is at least one of its functions.
Wow.
So it's trying to make you think that everyone's stupid.
Everyone's stupid.
Postmodern schooling, we are told, is to focus on, quote, pleasure cultivation and on, quote, other attitudes and skills compatible with a non-work world. Thus, the socialization classroom of the century's beginning, itself a radical departure from schooling for mental and character development, can be seen to have evolved by 1967 into a full-scale laboratory for psychological experimentation. School conversion was assisted powerfully by a curious phenomenon of the middle to late 1960s, a tremendous rise in school violence and general school chaos, which followed a policy declaration, which seems to have occurred nationwide, that the disciplining of children must henceforth mimic the, quote, due process. The disciplining of children must henceforth mimic the, quote, due process practice of the court system. Teachers and administrators were suddenly stripped of any effective ability to keep order in schools, since the due process apparatus, of necessity a slow, deliberate matter, is completely inadequate to the continual outbreaks of childish mischief all schools experience. They just put up a bunch of red tape in the schools to make it so that teachers couldn't, really deal with the situation. It had to go through the principal. And if the teacher does anything too much, like the parent calls the principal, fired. They created a hierarchy. They needed to create a hierarchy. So now, without the time-honored ad hoc armory of disciplinary tactics to fall back on, disorder spiraled out of control, passing from the realm of annoyance into more dangerous terrain entirely as words surged through student bodies that teacher hands were tied. And each outrageous event that reached the attention of the local press served as an advertisement for expert prescriptions. Who had ever seen kids behave this way? Time to surrender community involvement to the management of experts. Time also for emergency measures like special education and Ritalin. During this entire period, lasting 5 to 7 years, outside agencies like the Ford Foundation exercised the right to supervise whether, quote, child's rights were being given due attention, fanning the flames hotter even long after trouble had become virtually unmanageable. So the Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project, published at the peak of this violence, informed teacher training colleagues that under such circumstances, teachers had to be trained as therapists. They must translate prescriptions of social psychology into practical action in the classroom. As curriculum had been redefined, so teaching followed suit. Third in the series of new gospel texts was Bloom's taxonomy. In his own words, quote, a tool to classify the way individuals are to act, think, or feel as the result of some unit of instruction. Using methods of behavioral psychology, children would learn proper thoughts, proper feelings, and proper actions, and have their improper attitudes brought from home remediated. In all stages of the school experiment, testing was essential to localize the child's mental state on an official rating scale. Bloom's epic spawned important descendant forms: mastery learning, outcomes-based education, and school-to-work business collaborations. Each classified individuals for the convenience of social managers and businesses. Each offered data useful in controlling the mind and movements of the young, mapping the next adult generation. But for what purpose? Why was this being done? Oh, this is crazy. I love this part. A large piece of the answer can be found by reading between the lines of an article that appeared in the June 1998 issue of Foreign Affairs, written by Mortimer Zuckerman, owner of U.S. News and World Report and other major publications. The essay praises the American economy, characterizing its lead over Europe and Asia as so structurally grounded that no nation can possibly catch up for 100 years. American workers and the American management system are unique. Guys, this is from 1998. This guy said this. You are intrigued, I hope. So was I. Unless you believe in master race biology, our advantage can only have come from training of the American young, in school and out. Training which produces attitudes and behavior useful to management. What might these crucial determinants of business success be? First, this guy lays it out in the Foreign Affairs. First, says Zuckerman, the American worker is a pushover. That's my translation, not his, but I think it's a fair takeaway on what he means when he says, quote, the American is indifferent to everything but a paycheck. The American worker is a pushover. We're indifferent to everything but a paycheck. He doesn't try to tell the boss his job. By contrast, Europe suffers from a strong steam-age craft tradition where workers demand a large voice in decision-making. Asia is even worse off because even though the Asian worker is silenced, tradition and government interfere with what business can do. That's true. Next, says Zuckerman, workers in America live in constant panic. They know companies here owe them nothing as fellow human beings. Fear is our secret supercharger, giving management flexibility that no other country has. This is crazy. In 1996, oh my God. In 1996, after 5 years of record profitability, almost half of all Americans in big business feared being laid off. Wow. This fear keeps a brake on wages. Next, in the United States, human beings don't make decisions. Abstract formulas do. Management by mathematical rules makes the company manager-proof as well as worker-proof. Finally, our endless consumption completes the charmed circle. Consumption driven by nonstop addiction to novelty, a habit which provides American business with the only reliable domestic market in the world. Elsewhere, in hard times, business dries up, but not here. Here we shop till we drop, mortgaging the future in bad times as well as the good. Can't you feel in your bones Zuckerman is right? I have little doubt the fantastic wealth of American big business is psychologically and procedurally grounded in our form of schooling. The training field for these grotesque human qualities is the classroom. School trains individuals to respond as a mass. Boys and girls are drilled in being bored, frightened, envious, emotionally needy, and generally incomplete. A successful mass production economy requires exactly such a clientele. There's no reason to mass produce unless everyone has full of holes that they're trying to fill. Like you don't need to mass produce. We can make stuff for each other, like community, like
in our communities.
But if you start mass producing, you don't need communities,
right?
Because you can go to Walmart and find everything you need. All the love you need is in Walmart.
That's so true. And the U.S. is basically like we're all so isolated, and you don't realize how isolated we are until you go to a country that they're not isolated.
Exactly.
Like if you go to Mexico, in let's just say in the evening. Everyone's outside.
Everybody's outside.
Kids are running around playing and playing ball in the street, and like the parents are all, they may be drinking or barbecuing.
Most Americans don't know who their neighbor is.
Right.
You don't know who lives next to you. I don't know. Mexico, I brought him a pie when I moved in.
And Mexico's a third world country. And, but that's what they do. Like, and there's parks in every neighborhood. There's a park, and everybody goes there jogging, riding bikes. The kids are playing. There's workout stuff there. People actually use the parks, unlike here, where you'll occasionally see some people that go to the park.
It's like little kids. That's it.
Little kids and kids smoking weed.
Yeah,
that's it. That's literally it.
Right. So different.
Oh, this is almost the end of the section.
And they always tell us that the U.S. is the best.
We're
the best.
Wow, that's so funny. We were literally...
Yeah, and when you go to another country, you realize, oh my gosh, what they told us was completely us.
We're a third world country.
I found that out in 1976 when I went to Europe. I was so blown away. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. It's like a disgrace to be from the United States.
It's literally a disgrace.
It really is.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
People look at us like we're really stupid too.
Yeah. Like
we're stupid and we're fake, and we're not good at hiding how fake we are. Like they see right through.
Oh yeah.
The whole U.S. thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So a successful mass production economy requires such a clientele. A small business, small farm economy like that of the Amish requires individual competence, thoughtfulness, compassion, and universal participation. Our own requires a mangled mass of leveled, spiritless, anxious, familyless, friendless, godless, and obedient people who believe the difference between Cheers and Seinfeld is a subject worth arguing about. The extreme wealth of American big business is the direct result of school having trained us in certain attitudes like a craving for novelty. That's what the bells are for. They don't ring so much as to say, now for something different. That's nuts. The extreme wealth of American big business is the direct result of school having trained us in certain attitudes like a craving for novelty. That's what the bells are for. They don't ring so much as to say, now for something different. So an enclosure movement for children. The secret of American schooling is that it doesn't teach the way children learn, and it isn't supposed to. School is engineered to serve as a concealed command economy and deliberately re-stratified social order. It wasn't made for the benefit of kids and families, as those individuals and institutions would define their own needs. School is the first impression children get of organized society. Like most first impressions, it's a lasting one. Life according to school is dull and stupid. Only consumption promises relief. Coke, Big Macs, fashion jeans, that's where real meaning is found. That is the classroom's lesson, however indirectly delivered.
Yeah, wow.
The decisive dynamics which make forced schooling poisonous to healthy human development aren't hard to spot. Work in classrooms isn't significant work. It fails to satisfy real needs pressing on the individual. It doesn't answer real questions experience raises in the young mind. It doesn't contribute to solving any problem encountered in actual life. The net effect of making all schoolwork external to individual longings, experiences, questions, and problems is to render the victim listless. This phenomenon has been well understood at least since the time of the British enclosure movement, which forced small farmers off their land into factory work. Growth and mastery come only to those who vigorously self-direct. Initiating, creating, doing, reflecting, freely associating, enjoying privacy, these are precisely what the structures of schooling are set up to prevent, one on pretext or another. As I watched it happen, it took about 3 years to break most kids. 3 years confined to environments of emotional neediness with nothing real to do. In such environments, songs, smiles, bright colors, cooperative games, and other tension breakers do the work better than angry words and punishment. Years ago, it struck me as more than a little odd that the Prussian government was the patron of Heinrich Pestalozzi, inventor of multicultural fun and games, psychological elementary schooling, and of Frederick Freebohr, inventor of kindergarten. It struck me as odd that J.P. Morgan's partner Peabody was instrumental in bringing Prussian schooling to the prostrate South after the Civil War. But after a while, I began to see that behind the philanthropy lurked a rational economic purpose. The strongest meshes of the school net are invisible. Constant bidding for a stranger's attention creates a chemistry producing the common characteristics of modern school children: whining, dishonesty, malice, treachery, cruelty. Unceasing competition for official favor in the dramatic fishbowl of a classroom delivers cowardly children, little people sunk in chronic boredom, little people with no apparent purpose for being alive. The full significance of the classroom as a dramatic environment, as primarily a dramatic environment, has never been properly acknowledged or examined. The most destructive dynamic is identical to that which causes caged rats to develop eccentric or even violent mannerisms when they press a bar for sustenance on an apparatic reinforcement schedule, one where food is delivered at random but the rat doesn't suspect. Much of the weird behavior school kids display is a function of the aperiodic reinforcement schedule and the endless confinement and inactivity to slowly drive children out of their minds. Trapped children, like trapped rats, need close management. Any rat psychologist will tell you that.
It's depressing, but I mean, it's also empowering. Like, we have a choice, and this information is available for anyone who wants it.
Yeah.
So
Also,
The end of the mind calendar.
well, you know the 666 stuff? Do you guys know, like, the stuff behind that? Well, 666 is Mark of the Beast in the Bible.
Right.
yeah.
Did you guys, so the basis of our DNA, like the chemical, the core components of like our DNA strands are 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. We are 666, like the soul, the immortal soul is put into this human body. The human body is the devil, like not the devil, but like that's the trick of Earth. Like that's the yin and yang, the light and dark. Our eternal soul is being put in this mortal, you could call it like, you know, human. It's a temporary experience. It's an earthly experience. And if you look at Earth as hell, like it's a helly experience. Like there's a lot of suffering. It's really like hard. But yeah, so it's heaven and hell like intermixed. Like it's in the creature. This quote's so fucked. It's in a lot of books. Like I've read it so many times.
Yeah.
Out of all the quotes, this next one is the craziest. It's called Occasional Letter Number 1. You might have heard of it before. It's nuts. It was written like right at the time of the Federal Reserve. Like so, between 1896 and 1920, a small group of industrialists and financiers, together with their private charitable foundations, subsidized university chairs, university researchers, and school administrators. This group of men spent more money on forced schooling than the government itself did. Carnegie and Rockefeller, as late as 1915, were spending more themselves. So Carnegie and Rockefeller put more money into the education system than the government did. In this laissez-faire fashion, a system of modern schooling was constructed without public participation. The motives for this are undoubtedly mixed, but it will be useful for you to hear a few excerpts from the first mission statement of Rockefeller's General Education Board, as they occur in a document called Occasional Letter Number 1. This is from 1906. This is like 8 years before the Federal Reserve's up and running, like the school system. So this is a quote from the General Education Board. In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions, intellectual and character education, fade from our minds. An unhampered pride, tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up among them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way.
So this came out of Johns Hopkins in 1996. Quote, the American economy has grown massively since the mid-1960s, but workers' real spendable wages are no higher than they were 30 years ago. So that's from a book called Fat and Mean, about the significance of corporate downsizing. During the boom economy of the 1980s and 1990s, purchasing power rose for 20% of the population and actually declined 13% for the other 4/5. Indeed, after inflation was factored in, purchasing power of a working couple in 1995 was only 8% greater than for a single working man in 1905. Guys, this is crazy. So after inflation was factored in, purchasing power of a working couple in 1995 was only 8% greater than for a single working man in 1905. One person working versus two people working 100 years apart. And those 100 years in 1905, an iPhone was a dream thousands of years away. In 1995, iPhones were about to hit the scene. And it's only 8%. That makes no sense. It takes two bodies and a ton of technology to make only 8% more. Homie, the percent should be 250%. It should be 250%. It's 8%. This steep decline in common prosperity over 90 years forced both parents from home and deposited kids in the management systems of daycare, extended schooling, and commercial entertainment. Despite the century-long crusade that schooling was the cure for unevenly spread wealth, exactly the reverse occurred. Wealth was 250% more concentrated at century's end than at its beginning. I don't mean to be inflammatory, but it's as if government schooling made people dumber, not brighter, and made families weaker, not stronger, set the class structure in stone by dividing children into classes and setting them against one another, and has been midwife to an alarming concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a fraction of the national community. So this is called the school edition. I always knew school books and real books were different. Most kids do. But I remained vague on any particular grounds for my prejudice until one day, tired of the simple-minded junior high school English curriculum, I decided to teach Moby Dick to my 8th grade classes. A friendly assistant principal smuggled the school edition into the book purchases, and we were able to weigh anchor the next fall. What a book! Ishmael, the young seaman who relates Melville's tale, is a half-orphan by decree of fate, sentenced never to know a natural home again. But Ahab is no accidental victim. He has consciously willed his own exile from a young wife and child, from the fruits of his wealth, and from earth itself in order to pursue his vocation of getting even. Revenge on the natural order is what drives him. War against God and family. To me, it defines the essence of Americanness. It's no accident that America's 3 classic novels, Moby Dick, The Scarlet Letter, and Huckleberry Finn, each deal with ambiguous families, or that each emerges from a time not far from either side of the Civil War. America had been an inferno for families, as Melville, Hawthorne, and Twain all knew. Midway through our first full century as a nation, the nearly universal American experience of homelessness found its voice. Ishmael is a half-orphan, Ahab an absentee father and husband, the harpooners expatriate men of color, Pearl a bastard, Hester an adulteress, the Reverend Dimmesdale a sexual predator and runaway father, Huck Finn de facto an adoptee, Jim a twice uprooted African slave. When we think what our schools became, we need to recall what a great pile of us are homeless. See, We long for homes we can never have as long as we have institutions like school, television, corporation, and government and local parentis. Patricia Lines of the U.S. Department of Education, in trying honorably to discuss what the rank and file of homeschoolers actually do, finally declared it seems to be wrapped up closely with the feeling of, quote, intense interest in the life of the community. Above anything else, she found loyalty in the warp and woof of family. Quote, homeschoolers are tremendously loyal as family members. They are suspicious of television and other less intimate influences. They eat as a family, they socialize as a family, they attend outings as a family, they become members of an extended homeschooling community. American great fiction is about individuals broken from family. The closest they come to satisfying the universal yearning is a struggle for surrogates. Like the strange connection between Pearl, Hester, and the Dark Forest, America's most fascinating storytellers focus on the hollowness of American public life. We have no place to go when work is done. Guys, this is crazy. We have no place to go when work is done. Our inner life long extinguished, our public work in remaking the world can never be done because personal homework isn't available to us. There's no institutional solace for this malady. In outrage at our lonely fate, we lay siege to the family sanctuary where it survives, as Ahab lay siege to the seas for his accursed whale. For this and other reasons long lost, I decided to teach Moby Dick to my 8th grade class, including the dumb ones. I discovered right away the white whale was just too big for 45-minute bell breaks. I couldn't divide it comfortably to fit in the schedule. Melville's book is too vast to say just what the right way to teach it really is. It speaks to every reader privately. To grapple with it demanded elastic time, not the fixed bells of junior high. Indeed, it offered so many choices of purpose, some aesthetic, some historical, some social, some philosophical, some theological, some dramatic, and some economic, that compelling the attention of a room full of young people to any one aspect seemed willful and arbitrary. Soon after I began teaching Moby Dick, I realized the school edition wasn't a real book, but a kind of disguised indoctrination, providing all the questions a scientific addition to the original text designed to make the book teacher-proof and student-proof. If you even read those questions, let alone answered them, there would be no chance ever again for a private exchange between you and Melville. The invisible editor would have preempted it. The editors of the school edition provided a package of prefabricated questions and more than 100 chapter-by-chapter abstracts and interpretations of their own. Many teachers consider this a gift. It does the thinking for them. If I didn't assign these questions, kids wanted to know why not. Their parents wanted to know why not. Unless everyone duly parroted the party lines set down by the book editor, children used to getting high marks became scared and angry. The school text of Moby Dick had been subtly denatured. Worse than useless, it was actually dangerous. So I pitched it out and bought a set of undoctored books with my own money. The school edition of Moby Dick asked all the right questions, so I had to throw it away. Real books don't do that. Real books demand people actively participate by asking their own questions. Books that show you the best questions to ask aren't just stupid, they hurt the mind under the guise of helping it. Exactly the way standardized tests do. Real books, unlike school books, can't be standardized. They are eccentric, and no book fits everyone. I'm going to read that again. Real books, unlike school books, can't be standardized. They are eccentric. No book fits everyone. And if you think about it, schooled people, like school books, are much alike. Some folks find that desirable for economic reasons. The discipline organizing our economy and our politics derives from mathematical and interpretive exercises, the accuracy of which depends upon customers being much alike and very predictable. People who read too many books get quirky. We can't have too much eccentricity or it would bankrupt us. And we already know the banks are not allowed to fail. If you don't know that, listen to my financial lecture. Market research depends on people behaving as if they were alike. It doesn't really matter whether they are or not. One way to see the difference between school books and real books like Moby Dick is to examine different procedures which separate librarians, the custodians of real books. Oh my God, this is my favorite part. One way to see the difference between school books and real books like Moby Dick is to examine different procedures which separate librarians, the custodians of real books, from school teachers, the custodians of school books. This is fire. This is so good. To begin with, libraries are usually comfortable, clean, and quiet. They are orderly places where you can actually read instead of just pretending to read. For some reason, libraries are never age segregated, nor do they presume to segregate readers by questionable tests of ability any more than farms or forests or oceans do. The librarian doesn't tell me what to read, doesn't tell me what sequence of reading I have to follow, and they don't grade my reading. The librarian trusts me to have a worthwhile purpose of my own. I appreciate that, and I trust the library in return. Some other significant differences between libraries and schools. This is so important. Some other significant differences. The librarian lets me ask my own questions and helps me when I want help, not when she decides I need it. If I feel like reading all day long, that's okay with the librarian, who doesn't compel me to stop at intervals by ringing a bell in my ears. The library keeps its nose out of my home. It doesn't send letters to my family, nor does it issue orders on how I should use my reading time at home. The library doesn't play favorites. It's a democratic place as seems proper in a democracy. If the books I want are available, I get them, even if that decision deprives someone more gifted and talented than I am. The library never humiliates me by posting ranked lists of good readers. It presumes good reading is its own reward and doesn't need to be held up as an object lesson to bad readers. One of the strangest differences between a library and a school is that you almost never see a kid behaving badly in a library. The library never makes predictions about my future based on my past reading habits. It tolerates eccentric reading because it realizes free men and women are often very eccentric. Finally, the library has real books, not school books. I know the Moby Dick I find in the library won't have questions at the end of the chapter or be scientifically bowdlerized. Library books are not written by collective pens. At least, not yet. Real books conform to the private curriculum of each author, not to the invisible curriculum of a corporate bureaucracy. Real books transport us to an inner realm of solitude and unmonitored mental reflection in a way school books and computer programs can't. If they were not devoid of such capacity, they would jeopardize school routines devised to control behavior. Real books conform to the private curriculum of particular authors, not to the demands of bureaucracy. Okay, so there's a lot of numbers in this section, but just hang in there. They'll be lined up next to each other in a very manageable way so you can understand it as I read. At the start of World War II, millions of men showed up at registration offices to take low-level academic tests before being inducted. So the start of World War II. The years of maximum mobilization were 1942 to 1944. The fighting force had been mostly schooled in the 1930s, both those inducted and those turned away. Of the 18 million men were tested, 17,280,000 of them were judged to have the minimum competence in reading required to be a soldier, a 96% literacy rate. Although this was a 2% fall off from the 98% rate among voluntary military applicants 10 years earlier, the dip was so small it didn't worry anyone. So World War II, with the draft, 96% literacy rate. 18 million men tested, almost all of them passed. So 96% literacy rate. World War II was over in 1945. 6 years later, another war began in Korea. Several million men were tested for military service, but this time 600,000 were rejected. Literacy in the draft pool had dropped to 81%, even though all that was needed to classify a soldier as literate was fourth grade reading proficiency. In the few short years from the beginning of World War II to Korea, a terrifying problem of adult illiteracy had appeared. The Korean War group received most of its schooling in the 1940s, and it had more years in school with more professionally trained personnel and more scientifically selected textbooks than the World War II men, yet it could not read, write, count, speak, or think as well as the earlier, less schooled contingent. So a third American war began in the mid-1960s. By its end in 1973, the number of men found non-inductible by reason of inability to read safety instructions, interpret road signs, decipher orders, and so on, in other words, the number found illiterate, had reached 27% of the total pool. Vietnam-era young men had been schooled in the 1950s and the 1960s, much better schooled than either of the two earlier groups. But the 4% illiteracy of 1941, which had transmuted into the 19% illiteracy of 1952, had now grown into the 27% illiteracy of 1970. So the literacy of Americans goes from 4% illiterate to 10 years later, 20% illiterate to 20 years later, 27% illiterate. Not only had the fraction of competent readers dropped to 73%, but a substantial chunk of even those were only barely adequate. They could only keep abreast of developments by reading a newspaper. They could not read for pleasure. They could not sustain a thought or an argument. They could not write well enough to manage their own affairs without assistance. Consider how much more compelling the steady progression of intellectual blindness is when we track it through Army admission tests rather than college admission scores and standardized reading tests, which inflate apparent proficiency by frequently changing the way the tester scores. Does that make sense? It's saying that you can't lie about interpreting road signs or following orders when it's life or death. But if you're going through academia, you can constantly lie and make yourself seem infinitely smarter than you are. Okay, so this is looking back at the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. What was considered literate back then. You really don't want to know. It's pretty embarrassing. It's embarrassing for us. Popular novels of the period give a clue. Last of the Mohicans, published in 1826, sold so well that a contemporary equivalent would have to move 10 million copies to match it. If you pick up an uncut version, you find yourself in a dense thicket of philosophy, history, culture, manners, politics, geography, analysis of human motives and actions, all conveyed in data-rich periodic sentences so formidable only a determined and well-educated reader can handle it nowadays. Yet in 1818, we were a small farm nation without colleges or universities to speak of. Could those simple folk have had more complex minds than our own? Last of the Mohicans, dude. Oh my God. We're so dumb now. We're so dumb. Okay, so this statistic absolutely blew my mind. Especially knowing so many people in law enforcement and also knowing some prisoners too. This is so sad. This is so crazy. According to the Justice Department, 80% of the incarcerated violent criminal population is illiterate or nearly so. And 67% of all criminals locked up are illiterate. Over half of criminals just can't read. They're just people, guys. They got fucked over. Guys, school is 13 years. School is 13 years. It takes a couple months to learn how to read. Yet over half of our prison population can't read. If that doesn't make you think about everything and want to change it and want to spread this message, I don't know. So do you guys want to hear what fifth graders were reading in 1882? Guys, this is 140 years ago, 140 years ago, this is what fifth graders are. That's so funny. Are you smarter than a fifth grader? Wow. They really put it all like in front of us and just laughed at us. Guys, this is ridiculous. The fifth grade curriculum in 1882. This is in the Appleton School Reader. This is what kids had to read. William Shakespeare, Henry Thoreau, George Washington, Sir Walter Scott, Mark Twain, Benjamin Franklin, Oliver Wendell Holmes, John Bunyan, Daniel Webster, Samuel Johnson, Lewis Carroll, Thomas Jefferson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and others like them. In 1995, a student teacher of fifth graders in Minneapolis wrote to the local newspaper, quote, "I was told children are not to be expected to spell the following words correctly. Back, big, call, came, can, day, did, dog, down, get, good, have, he, home, in, if, it, like, little man, morning, mother, mine, night, off, out, over, people, play, ran, said, saw, she, soon, there, them, there, time, to, up, us, very, water, we, went, where, when, will, wound, etc. Is this nuts? Yes, it's fucking crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. All this is crazy. God damn. So reading and rigorous discussion of that reading in a way that obliges you to formulate a position and support it against objections is an operational definition of education in its most fundamental, civilized sense. No one can do this very well without learning ways of paying attention, from a knowledge of diction and syntax, figures of speech, etymology, and so on, to a sharp ability to separate the primary and the subordinate, understand allusion, master a range of modes of presentation, test truth, and penetrate beyond the obvious to the profound messages of text. Reading, analysis, and discussion are the way we develop reliable judgment, the principal way we come to penetrate covert movements behind the facade of public appearances. Without the ability to read and argue, we're just geese to be plucked. Just as experience is necessary to understand abstraction, so the reverse is true. Experience can only be mastered by extracting general principles out of the mass of details. In the absence of a perfect universal mentor, books and other texts are the best and cheapest stand-ins, always available to those who know where to look. Watching details of an assembly line or a local election unfold isn't very educational unless you have been led in careful ways to analyze the experience. So, reading is the skeleton key for all who lack a personal tutor of quality, which is most all of us. Like, we all kind of lack like a personal, unless you're fat rich and your parents have like a ton of money to give you like the like not, you know, just like a normal tutor, but like a jack of all trades, like to actually teach you like how to think for yourself and like do stuff. No one has that, so we have books. Like, that's all we have. Reading teaches nothing more important than the state of mind in which you find yourself absolutely alone with the thoughts of another mind, a matchless form of intimate rapport available only to those with the ability to block out distraction and concentrate. Hence the urgency of reading well if you read for power. Once you trust yourself to go mind to mind with great intellects, artists, scientists, warriors, and philosophers, you are finally free. In America, before we have forced schooling, an astonishing range of unlikely people knew reading was like Samson's locks, something that could help make them formidable, that could teach them their rights and how to defend those rights, could lead them toward self-determination, free from intimidation by experts. These same unlikely people knew that the power bestowed through reading could give them insights into the ways of the human heart, so they would not be cheated or fooled so easily, and that it could provide an inexhaustible store of useful knowledge, advice on how to do just about anything. So not only do we have books, we have the internet, like now. Anything, bro. You can become an expert on anything. Like, no expert should intimidate you. No. You have the ability to
have access to all their information.
You have access to all, and yeah, exactly.
So back at the beginning of the 20th century, the monstrously influenced Edward Thorndike of Columbia Teachers College said that school would establish conditions for, quote, selective breeding before the masses take things into their own hands, end quote. The religious purpose of modern schooling was embarrassingly evident back when Ross and Thorndike were on center stage, but they were surrounded by many like-minded friends. Another major architect of standardized testing, H. Goddard, said in his book Human Efficiency, this is from 1920, that government schooling was about, quote, the perfect organization of the hive. He said standardized testing was a way to make lower classes recognize their own inferiority.
Well,
Like wearing a dunce cap, it would discourage them from breeding and having ambition. Goddard was head of the psychology department at Princeton. This was the head of the psych department at Princeton in the early 1900s. So imagine the effect he had on the minds of doctoral candidates he coached, and there were hundreds. We didn't leave the religious purpose of modern schooling back in the early years of the century. Yeah, are you ready for this? In April of 1996, Al Shanker of the AFT said in his regular New York Times split-page advertisement that, quote, every teacher was really a priest. And then wasn't it earlier in the book that we said it should give you some clue you can't sue a priest and you can't sue a teacher.
So they literally can do whatever they want.
They can do whatever they want to all of our kids, bro. And you have no say in it. And if you do, the rest of the world looks at you like you're fucking crazy because all their kids are in school too. Right. It's like, dude, well, fuck you if you're like,
fall into line.
Like, you better join. Like, bro, you don't need a police force. You need to turn the neighbors into the police. Yeah. like, bro, just turn the people into the fucking cops. Yeah. Like,
make everyone the same. The second someone steps out of line, they're looked at like an alien, like a dangerous, like a dangerous alien. They're a danger. You're a danger, and you're harming your kid.
Yeah, bro.
For not turning them into a conformist.
You're hurting him, bro.
You're really hurting him in the long run.
He's gonna be socially impaired. He's not gonna know how to act around other kids. Because that's the biggest argument.
He's not gonna have any social skills.
Yeah, he's not gonna have.
Talk to people. How's he gonna get a job?
How's he gonna be able to talk to people?
How's he supposed to sit through an interview, a job interview?
Bro, I spent a lot of my life alone, dude, and I can get any job I want. Yo, so I remember when I read this the first time. This is like a 2-page. So this section is 2 pages, and it's called the National Adult Literacy Survey.
Okay.
The National Adult Literacy Survey. Mm-hmm. If you're listening to this and you can understand it, there's an inherent responsibility.
Okay.
In 1982, Anthony Ottinger, a member of the private discussion group called the Council on Foreign Relations. So if you listen to The Creature from Jekyll Island, you'll know all about the Council of Foreign Relations. It's called the CFR. I'm not going to explain it here because I explain it a lot, like in the book. It's super fucked. Anyway, so this guy, Anthony Ottinger, he asked an audience of communications executives this question, quote, this is 1982. Mm-hmm. Do we really have to have everybody literate? Writing and reading in the traditional sense, when we have means through our technology to achieve a new flowering of oral communication. Ottinger suggested, quote, our idea of literacy is, quote, obsolete. 83 years earlier, John Dewey had written in, quote, the primary education fetish that, quote, the plea for the predominance of learning to read in early school life because of the great importance attaching to literature seems to be a perversion. For the balance of this discussion, I'm going to step into deeper water, first reviewing what reading in a Western alphabet really means and what makes it a reasonably easy skill to transmit or to self-teach, and then tackling what happened to deprive the ordinary person of the ability to manage it very well. I want to first show you how and then answer the more speculative question of why. So, the National Adult Literacy Survey represents 190 million U.S. adults over age 16 with an average school attendance of 12.4 years. The survey is conducted by the Educational Testing Service of Princeton, New Jersey. It ranks adult Americans into 5 levels. Here's its 1993 analysis. So I'm just going to recap kind of the importance of this studying group.
Okay.
Basically 200 million U.S. adults.
Okay.
So a lot of people.
Yeah.
They surveyed 200 million U.S. adults.
They got pretty thorough.
Between over the age of 16.
Okay.
So you had to be over the age of 16, and you had to have attended school for 12.4 years.
Okay.
So these kids went to school.
So
these people went through normal schooling, kindergarten through 12th grade, and a little more, yeah. And this is in 1993.
Okay. So
the results rank adult Americans into 5 levels. Okay. So we're going to go through them right now. Mm-hmm. This is the first one. 42 million Americans over the age of 16 can't read. Some of this group can write their names on Social Security cards and fill in height, weight, and birth spaces on application forms. So 42 million people cannot read out of the 190 million surveyed. Which right there is a lot. That's a lot.
That's in 95.
This is in 93. This is in the 90s. This is in the 90s. This is this was yesterday. Yeah, this was yesterday.
This is recent.
42 million people cannot read out of the 190. Gabi, this is the first level. All right. 50 million can recognize printed words on a 4th and 5th grade level, and they cannot write simple messages or letters. So, Gabi, you got the first 40 million can't read, and then the next 50 million can recognize a 4th and 5th grade reading level.
What?
Gabi, the third group, 55 to 60 million people are limited to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade reading. A majority of this group could not figure out the price per ounce of peanut butter in a 20-ounce jar costing $1.99 when told they could round the answer off to a whole number. Gabi, number 4, 30 million have 9th and 10th grade reading proficiency. This group and all preceding groups cannot understand a simplified written explanation of the procedures used by attorneys and judges in selecting juries.
This is crazy.
Gabi, are you ready for the last one, dude? Yeah. The last group?
Yes. Let's hear it.
So, so we went through all the other groups. So what you have now is the last group. Yeah. 96.5% of the American population is mediocre to illiterate where deciphering print is concerned. This is no commentary on their intelligence, but without ability to take in primary information from print and to interpret it, they're at the mercy of commentators who tell them what things mean. A working definition of immaturity might include an excessive need for other people to interpret information for us. So, Gabi, 3.5% of the population demonstrated literacy skills adequate to traditional college study.
3.5.
So out of 190 million people, there's 3.5 people that can maneuver and think for themselves. Barely. Like, they're in college. Like, barely 3% of America can think for themselves, bro. The rest is just receiving, interpreting, letting someone else interpret it. Gabby, we have 6 corporations that run the news now. What was it, like 100 a year ago? Or 100 years ago, there were like 80 corporations that would interpret because, people were a little smarter. As people get stupider, Gabby, there's 6 corporations that interpret, and they're all owned by the same one. There's one group that is interpreting for
everyone.
96.5% of the population. So, I mean, yeah, please look into the study. Like, it blew my mind. So that 3.5% that's can do a traditional college study in 1940, guess what that number was? Guess what percent of the population could demonstrated literacy skills adequate to traditional college study?
Based on what I've read so far, I'm sure it's much higher than...
That's smart, yeah. How much higher? Just take a guess. It's 3.5% in the 90s.
And
so guess what it is in 1940?
In 1940, I don't know, 20%?
Gabby, it was 30%. We went from 30% in the 40s to 3.5% in the 90s.
Literally just a few decades later.
Today, in other developed countries, secondary students are at 30% right now. So you say when you go to other countries, people look at Americans like they're stupid, bro? It's because there's only 3.5% that know what's good.
Yeah.
And in other countries, it's 30%.
Yeah.
Like at base.
Yeah.
But do you see that it's deliberately been done? It's deliberately been done.
Yeah.
Like
Americans are told that we're like the superpower and like we're the safest country, we're the smartest country, we have the most opportunities. People here are dumb enough to believe it.
Gabby, that's beautiful. A working definition of immaturity might include an excessive need for other people to interpret information for us.
It's so accurate. It's so accurate.
Like home skillet. Like home.
That's crazy.
This is another sick example. Dick and Jane. Did you guys ever read Dick and Jane when you were a kid?
Probably.
It's like a little bit. It's like Dick and Jane like sat by the pond. Dick and Jane. It's like these 2 little kids, like Dick and Jane. And they just go on all these easy adventures, and it's just to help kids 2 easy names to do 2 easy shit.
Okay. Gotcha.
They were just hella easy children's books. So anyway, in 1930, the Dick and Jane pre-primer taught 68 sign words and 39 pages of story text with an illustration per page. And there was a total of 565 words that were being taught.
Dang.
And a teacher's guidebook of 87 pages. In 1951, so 21 years later, the same book was expanded to 172 pages with 184 illustrations, a total of 2,603 words,
Dang.
and a guidebook of 182 pages for the teachers to teach a vocabulary of 58 words. Dude, it went from 565 words that were being taught to kids and in 39 pages of text. And then they created 172 pages of text. So they went exponentially increased it. It taught 58 words.
That's so crazy. Damn.
Stupid.
Dang.
Bro, bro. Oh,
what the
It's
fuck?
so counterintuitive too. Let's just make more pictures and less words.
Yeah. Damn.
Oh my God. Y'all want to hear this?
Dumb it down a little bit.
Do you guys want to hear? Have you guys ever heard the story of Cat in the Hat?
Yeah.
but like the behind
no,
it,
no.
bro, this fucked me up. I'm so stoked you're here
I'm
for this
excited
part. This is
to
one of the
hear
coolest
this.
parts. So this is from an interview in 1981 with Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
So the legendary children's book author, Dr. Seuss, creator of a string of bestsellers using a controlled scientific vocabulary supplied by the publisher, demonstrated his awareness of the mindlessness of all this in an interview he gave in 1981. Quote, I did it for a textbook house and they sent me a word list. That was due to the Dewey Revolt in the 20s, in which they threw out phonics reading and went to word recognition, as if you're reading a Chinese pictograph instead of bending sounds or different letters. I think killing phonics was one of the greatest causes of illiteracy in this country. So they had it all worked out that a healthy child at the age of 4 can only learn so many words in a week. So there were 223 words to use in this book. I read the list 3 times and I almost went out of my head. I said, I'll read it once more, and if I can find 2 words that rhyme, that'll be the title of my book. So all these words were just, stupid ass simple words, and he had to use them. So he goes, I found cat and hat and said, the title of my book will be The Cat in the Hat. But yeah, dude, The Cat in the Hat. He got sent a list of a bunch of words, I think it was 50 words, and they're write a story using only these words.
Oh.
And he's like,
dang.
all right.
That's why it's that dumb.
So he goes, cat, hat.
Dumb.
It's dumb. Dude, he was
That
this is
so
retarded. He
insane.
did it in probably a night.
And he ate
Like-
on that.
And then he was
That's
8. Dude,
hey.
but he was dude, this is retarded. So as he got
Yeah.
famous and stuff, I guess he got super depressed.
Yeah, well.
He's I'm not teaching it. He's
Yeah.
I just cashed in on stupidity.
Yeah.
On nothing. And now everybody's reading The Cat in the Hat.
Damn, that's
So,
fucking crazy.
Yeah, very, very suspect, y'all.
Damn,
very,
for
very
real.
suspect. All right, this is nuts. So, this little section, he explained. So he starts to get into his experiences as a teacher right now. His personal experience. Yeah. He goes, I began to school teach as an engineer would, solving problems as they arose. Because of my upbringing and because of certain unresolved contradictions in my own character, I had a great private need not to just have a job, but to have work that would allow me to build the unbuilt parts of myself, to give me competence and let me feel my life was one being lived instead of it living me. I brought to those first years an intensity of watchfulness probably uncommon in those who grow up untroubled. My own deficiencies provided enough motivation to want to make something worthwhile happen for these kids. Had I remained a problem solver, I would have drowned in life for sure. But a habit of mind that demands things in context sensitized me to the culture of schooling as a major element in my work, and that wariness eventually allowed me to surmount it. The highest school priorities are number 1, administrative coherence.
Oh, man.
Number 2, student predictability.
Okay.
Number 3, institutional stability. And he goes on to say, children doing well or poorly are incidental to the main administrative mission. Hence, teachers are often regarded as instruments which respond best if handled like servants made to account for the silverware. In order to give these vertical relationships strength, the horizontal relationships among teachers collegiately must be kept weak. So this is crazy. I never knew,
Damn.
but then when you start to think about sitting in class, remember how teachers would talk about other
Yeah.
teachers? Bro, so get ready for this. So this divide and conquer principle is true of any large system. The way it plays itself out in the culture of schooling is to bestow on some few individuals favor and on some other few individuals grief, and to approach the large middle with a carrot in one hand and a stick in the other, with these dismal examples illuminating the discourse. So in simple terms, some teachers are bribed into loyalty, but seldom so securely that they become complacent, and others are sent despairing, but seldom without hope, since a crumb might eventually fall their way. Yeah, those whose loyalties are purchased function as spies to report staff defiance or as cheerleaders for new initiatives. I used to hear from Granddad that a man's price for surrendering shows you the dirt floor of his soul. Bro, this is crazy. I used to hear that Granddad
I used to hear from Granddad that a man's price for surrendering shows you the dirt floor of his soul. A short list of customary teacher payoffs includes, number 1, assignment to a room on the... Guys, these were all things that were like... This is a list of shit that was like offered to, like, would be dangled. Like, the teachers like fought over. Who would have thought? So number 1, assignment to a room on the shady side of the building. 2, or one away from the playground noise. 3, a parking permit. 4, the gift of a closet as a private office. 5, the tacit understanding that one can solicit administrative aid in disciplinary situations without being persecuted afterwards. 6, first choice of textbooks from the available supply in the book room. 7, access to the administrator's private photocopy machine. 8, a set of black shades for your windows so the room can be sufficiently darkened to watch movies. 9, privileged access to media equipment so machines could be counted on to take over the teaching a few days each week. 10, assignment of a student teacher as a private clerk. 11, the right to go home on Friday a period or two early in order to beat the weekend rush. And 12, a program with the first period, or first and second, free so the giftee can sleep late while a friend or friendly administrator clocks them in.
Damn.
Many more deals than this are available, and extra pay for certain cushy specialized jobs or paid after school duties are major perks. Thus is the ancient game of divide and conquer played in school. How many times I remember hearing, "Wake up, Gatto, why should I bother? This is all a big joke, nobody cares, just keep the kids quiet. That's what a good teacher is. I have a life when I get home from this sewer." Bruh, I have a life when I get home from this sewer. Dude, it's just a job to these people. It's literally just a job. Oh, homie, this is... I'm so stoked you're here. Alright, you gotta hear this next one for sure. Right? You gotta dip, but like, don't worry. So education as a helix sport. Here's a principle of real education to carry you through the moments of self-doubt. Education is a helix sport. A unique personal project like seatless unicycle riding over trackless wilderness. A sport that avoids rails, rules, and programmed confinement. The familiar versions of this are cross-country skiing, sailing, hang gliding, skateboarding, surfing, solitary mountain climbing, 1,000-mile walks, things like that. I think of education as one too. In a helix sport, the players search for a new relationship with themselves. They endure pain and risk to achieve this goal. Helix sports are free of expert micromanagement. Experts can't help you much in that moment of truth when a mistake might leave you dead. Helix sports are a revolt against predestination. Bringing children up properly is a helix sport forcing you to realize that no boy or girl on earth is just like another, which we all know. Everybody's unique.
Yeah.
If you do understand this, you also understand there can exist no reliable map to tell you all you need to know. Guys, this is fucked. If you process kids like sardines, don't be surprised when they come out oily and dead.
Shit, for real.
Bruh, like...
Amen to that.
Like, bruh. In the words of the Albany Free School, if you aren't making it up as you go along, you aren't doing it right. The managerial and social science people who built forced schooling had no scruples about making your kids fit into their scheme. It's suffocating to the spirit and to be treated this way. A young lady from Tucson wrote me, "Now that I'm nearly 25, I can hardly remember why I began to be afraid to go to school. I wrote back that she was afraid because her instinct warned her the school business had no use for the personal growth she sought. All pedagogical theory is based on stage theories of human development. All stage theories of child rearing talk in averages. The evidence before your own eyes and ears must show you that average men and women don't actually exist. Yet they remain the basis of social theory. Even though such artificial constructs are useless to tell you anything valuable about your own implacably non-abstract child." Guys, there's no such thing as like the average man or woman.
Yeah.
Right. There isn't.
There's not.
Those are
We're
just-
all radically unique.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you put everyone in school and you're like, yo, you got like, this is what everyone has to do. This is what the average man does. There's no such thing as the average man, bro. They had to create this idea. It's the same thing we did with Jesus. They turned him into a superhero. If you create this,
it's like another social construct.
Yeah. If you create this like
an average
superhero, average man, like not even a superhero, just an average man. This is like the media. This is what you should strive for. Like what you can do. Like it's what you do. Like you go to school.
Fit
like
inside that box, and you'll be fine in society.
For real.
Slip in, bro. Just slip in. All right, so this dude Munsterberg. His name was Hugo Munsterberg. Okay. He was one of the people who was in the birth of 20th century mass schooling. In 1892, a recent emergé to America from Wilhelm Wundt's laboratory of physiological psychology in Leipzig and Saxony. He was a Harvard professor of psychology. So Munsterberg taught his students to look at schools as social laboratories suitable for testing theory, not as aggregates of young people pursuing their own purposes. The St. Louis Exposition of 1904 showcased his ideas for academics all over the world, and the popular press made his notions familiar to upper classes, horrified by the unfamiliar family ways of immigrants, eager to find ways to separate immigrant children from those alien practices of their parents. Dude, so like, 1900 at the time, like, new waves of like immigration. They're like, yo, like Americans are like, fuck tradition. Like, basically, they realized if you came from a country that wasn't America, you have some values in you still. Yeah. You care about family, you care about culture and tradition. Yeah. So when you get to America, separate the kids from the tradition as soon as possible. So get them in kindergarten, preschool, put them in and create all these new Americanized.
Make them assimilate?
What's the quickest way to make people forget their roots, bro? Strip them from their family when they're kids, and then create like a stressed out, crazy environment that they have to survive in. They literally have to survive in it.
Kids
so it's like
survival mode.
Dude, I can't. Yeah, they're like, oh, I can't bring my traditions because these kids have different. These kids like do stuff like this, so I need to do stuff like this. Then you go home and you like get mad at your parents for doing like all this traditional stuff, and you're like, Mom, Dad, that's not how it works in the real world. That's not what the real world is, bro. Like school's getting you ready for the real world, like, bro, like.
Damn, that's tricky.
Dude, oh fuck, we're almost done. We just have like 4 pages in there. I was gonna wait, but nah. All right. Yeah, this is fucked. In a famous book, The Proper Study of Mankind, 1948. Okay. So immediately that title's suspect as hell.
Right.
The Proper Study of Mankind, right. 1948, paid for by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Russell Sage Foundation.
Right.
The favorite principle of true believers since Plato makes an appearance. Quote, a society could be completely made over in something like 15 years. The time it takes to inculcate a new culture into a rising group of youngsters. Despite the spirit of profound violence hovering over such seemingly bloodless abstract formulas, this is indeed the will-o'-the-wisp pursued throughout the 20th century in forced schooling. Not intellectual development, not character development, but the inculcation of a new synthetic culture in children, one designed to condition its subjects to a continual adjusting of their lives by unseen authorities. You guys know who Al Shanker is? Well, you're about to find out. He's kind of an asshole. So Al Shanker was a longtime president of the American Federation of Teachers. The president of the American Federation of Teachers. Dude, like some of this shit in this book's like hard to believe, bro. Because just that you haven't like people like, but then you look it all up. Like I verified it. Like it's all legit. Like, so Al Shanker, longtime president of the American Federation of Teachers, said in one of his last Sunday advertisements in the New York Times before his death. So he said this right before he died in the New York Times. Quote, public schools do not exist to please Johnny's parents. They do not even exist to ensure that Johnny will one day earn a good living at a job he likes.
It's like a waste of time when you think about it.
Dude, and time's the most valuable thing. Yeah. It's wasting the most valuable thing in the world.
I guess it's like, but you got like low key think about it. Like low key, there gotta be workers for business. Like not like you can't.
But they that's what they realize. They realize you only need workers if you have mass production.
Yeah.
But we don't need mass production.
Yeah,
we
true.
need communities of 100. Mass
not
production.
necessary.
It
Yeah.
rips apart the human.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't fit into human nature. Mass production.
Yeah,
We
that's true.
We can't
We
be
need more
mass
quality.
produced. Yeah, we
That's
need.
why, like,
Dude, but look at
eco-villages,
trade,
sustainable living
like,
communities.
That's
like,
what, and
living
well,
on
dude,
a
but
pretty
also
awesome
art, like real art, like it's someone making something. You
Yeah.
can't like, sure you can like, dude. There's something very different about a hand carved chair and a chair that comes from millions of others off a factory
for
line.
real.
Like there's no energy. You can feel it, bro. Like
Yeah.
we don't need mass production. Even with mass production, what a third of the world is still hungry. Like what did mass production solve? Nothing. It made more people depressed. Like, bro, it did
made
nothing.
more
Like,
poverty.
so yeah, so
It created-
fuck mass production, bro.
Yeah.
Like,
It
fuck
yeah,
all that
it just
noise.
allowed
But in a
for the
capitalist
rich
world, like, it's
people-
fire. It's like, oh
Yeah.
shit, you mean I got 1 million customers that are gonna buy the same exact thing?
Exactly.
Bet me money. Like, I'll take all that shit. Like, I'll eat up. Like,
For real.
So, in 1989, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, a group of experts in the field of math education, launched a campaign to, quote, change the content and teaching of mathematics. This new math created state and district policies which, quote, tend to present math reform as religion and identify as sinful behaviors teacher-delivered instruction, individual student desk work, and papers corrected for error. Teachers are ordered to keep, quote, an elaborate diary on each child's mathematical disposition. So, like everything we were talking about before, turn it into a religion. Like, so it can be and dude, also a sin. Like, oh, that makes, dude, what, if you see that red fucking ink on your paper,
Yeah,
like,
you're like,
Oh,
fuck.
you're like, Jesus Christ, like,
Red
I
marks,
fucked up. Like,
red
I didn't learn the
Yeah.
steps properly.
Yeah.
Teach me the steps, like, teach me the steps, make me, because, dude, I understand. Also, like, how fucked was it, guys, growing up? Do you remember asking your parents for help with math when you were in, like, third
no,
grade?
no.
And they're like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
true.
this
And I'm
is
like,
weird.
It's third grade. What do you mean you
Yeah.
don't know how to divide? Like, you can't.
Yeah.
And they're like, they changed everything. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean they changed math? They changed, like, numbers? Dude, they built the pyramids with whatever
Yeah.
math they had thousands of years ago. You're telling me these jackasses know how to change math for the better? Like, I don't see pyramids being built. Like, bruh, nah, like,
damn,
dude,
that shit is fucked.
we got scammed, bro.
Oh,
we
big
got
time.
scammed
Fuck.
big time, bro.
Oh,
Like, oh,
damn,
dude.
they're on it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
bro.
even have my kid in school. Fuck that.
Oh no, like I'm not like no, like if I have kid, bro, self-educate like till they're dead, bro. Like I gotta take like different community. They need to
Gotta
see
be
different
by
shit.
me.
Like
we gotta be traveling.
we gotta be traveling the world. Like we need to be like
No, homie.
teaching each other, bro. Because that's the other thing. Kids teach you fat shit. Like
yeah, they
my
got a whole
kid-
nother perspective.
dude, yeah. So since Aristotle, thinkers have understood that work is the vital theater of self-knowledge. Schooling in concert with a controlled workplace is the most effective way to foreclose the development of imagination ever devised. Do you want me to read that again?
Yeah, for real, that shit went over.
Since Aristotle, thinkers have understood that work is the vital theater of self-knowledge. So it's basically saying, as you work for yourself, you
Experience,
discover yourself.
Yeah.
As you work,
That
like
makes
you,
sense,
yeah,
yeah,
as you
yeah.
do self-work,
Do
you do
things or
self-discovery.
whatever,
Yeah,
yeah.
you find out like what you like, what you do. Yeah.
For real.
So schooling in concert with a controlled workplace. So forced schooling mixed with corporate jobs, basically. So like forced schooling to where you have to fit in somewhere is the most effective way to foreclose the development of imagination ever devised. If you have to go to the same, like if you're forced to go to school and you know there's like a specific job, why would you think
Why
about
would you
anything?
think
Why would
of-
you think about anything else?
There's no need to think
There's no
outside
need
the
to,
box.
everything's been, exactly,
Yeah.
it's all been handed in front of you. It's just do this,
The
just follow
outline
this.
has been given.
Just do this, and if you don't do this, you're going to hell, or you're going to be
Yeah.
homeless and die, which is the worse than hell.
Man,
Because and also you're going to disrespect our family. Like you need to.
No, that's for real.
So this dude, William Torrey Harris, he was inspired by the notion that correctly managed mass schooling would result in a population so dependent on leaders that schism and revolution would be things of the past. If a world state could be cobbled together by Hegelian
tactical manipulation, and such a school plan imposed upon it, history itself would stop. No more wars, no civil disputes, just people waiting around pleasantly like the Eloy and Wells the Time Machine, waiting for teacher to tell them what to do. The psychological tool was alienation. The trick was to alienate children from themselves so they couldn't turn inside for strength, to alienate them from their families, religions, cultures, etc., so that no countervailing force could intervene.
Yeah.
Dude, because if kids are in school, you can't think.
No,
There's not a minute to think. You have recess.
Yeah.
And you got to think about, how do I survive in the playground? Like, I'm finally with kids my own age, not controlled by someone. Yeah. How do I just maneuver that?
Yeah.
You don't have time to think, bro.
Yeah.
For like 12 years, and then you're in college, bro. You don't have time to think, period, bro. They don't give you fucking time to think.
Damn,
like,
bro.
And so of course you're just gonna like just be reacting. If you're not thinking, you're reacting. And if you're reacting for like
your entire
life, bro, like look around one day, you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is going on? Like, so Andrew Carnegie, that dude who just had that statement, Andrew Carnegie paid to keep him as the U.S. Commissioner of Education for 16 years.
Damn.
That dude who said that, he was running that shit for 16 years. Long enough to set the stage for an era of, quote, scientific management, or Fordism, as the Soviets called it, in American schooling. Long enough to bring about the rise of multi-layered school bureaucracy. But it would be a huge mistake to regard Harris and other true believers as merely tools of the business interest. What they were about was the creation of modern living faith to replace the Christian one which died for them. It was their good fortune to live at precisely the moment when the dreams of the empire of business, to use Emperor Carnegie's label, for an Anglo-American world state were beginning to consider worldwide schooling as the most direct route to that destination. So, both movements to centralize the economy and to centralize schooling were aided immeasurably by the rapid disintegration of old-line Protestant churches and the rise from their pious ashes of the social gospel ideology, aggressively underwritten by important industrialists who intertwined church-going tightly with standards of business, entertainment, and government. So the experience of religion came to mean, in the words of Reverend Earl Hoon, the best social programs money can buy. Religion came to mean the best social programs money can buy. A clear statement of the belief that social justice and salvation were to be had through skillful consumption. So yeah, another early part of the book, dude, in school, put as many holes in the kid as possible, so they're just always trying to fill them with things. By consuming. Yeah. What's your job as an American? Consume. It's consume. To fill, fill what? Like, bro, it's endless consumption. Yeah, social media.
And
like,
if we don't consume, people lose jobs.
Oh yeah.
People lose jobs. Yeah, if you don't consume, you're not doing your part.
Yeah.
Because you need to.
Because people produce, and people need to produce to make money.
True.
But if people aren't buying, people aren't consuming.
Exactly. And if people are just mainly producing trinkets and we're just consuming trinkets, like, yeah, we're not going there. Like,
we ain't going nowhere.
We're not going nowhere. We're doing exactly where they are. History stops.
Yeah.
They're trying to stop history. They're trying to create a utopia.
Yeah, just halting growth.
Shaler Matthews, Dean of Chicago's School of Divinity, editor of Biblical World, president of the Federal Council of Churches, wrote his influential Scientific Management in the Churches from 1912 to convince American Protestants they should sacrifice independence and autonomy and adopt the structure and strategy of corporations. If this seems to make the church something of a business establishment, it is precisely what should be the case. If Americans listened to the corporate message, Matthews told them, they would feel anew the spell of Jesus. In the decade before World War I, a consortium of private foundations drawing on industrial wealth began slowly working toward a long-range goal of lifelong schooling and a thoroughly rationalized global economy and society. All right, so this is Cardinal Principles, and this is the last section of the book that I actually want to talk about before we move on to some final thoughts. But yeah, there's just so much that needs to be done. Like, this is just the start. Like, receiving this information and spreading it is just the start. Obviously, you can see there's so much that needs to be done. So, Frances Fitzgerald, in her superb study of American textbooks, America Revised, notes that school books are superficial and mindless, that they deliberately leave out important ideas, that they refuse to deal with conflict, but then she admits to bewilderment. What could the plan be behind such text? Is the composition of these books accidental or deliberate? Sidestepping an answer to her own question, Fitzgerald traces the changeover to a pair of influential NEA reports published in 1911 and 1918, which reversed the scholarly determinations of the Blue Ribbon, quote, Committee of 10 report of 1893. And so if you listen to the money lecture, you already know that between 1911 and 1918, what happens? The Federal Reserve Act is passed, along with them realizing they needed to lock down the kids to keep the Federal Reserve in place. So the Committee of 10, that report from 1893, that committee laid down a rigorous academic program for all schools and for all children, giving particular emphasis to history, because history is the most important thing, and asserted, quote, the purpose of all education is to train the mind. The NEA reports of 1911 and 1918 denote a conscious abandonment of this intellectual imperative and the substitution of some very different guiding principles. These statements savagely attack the bookish curricula, which are, quote, responsible for leading tens of thousands of boys and girls away from pursuits for which they are adapted, toward pursuits which they are not, like independent businesses, invention, white-collar work, or the professions. The report went on to say, books give children false ideas of culture. These reports urge the same kind of drill which lay at the core of Prussian commoner schools. An interim report of 1917 also proposes that emphasis be shifted away from history to something safer called social studies. So you ever wonder why it was called social studies and not history? You can thank all this fuckery. So 1917, they proposed the switch from history to social studies. The thrust was away from any careful consideration of the past so that attention might be focused on the future. That 1918 NEA report, called The Cardinal Principles of Secondary Education, for all its maddening banality, was to prove over time one of the most influential education documents of the 20th century. It decreed that specified behaviors, health, and vocational training were the central goals of education, not mental development, not character, not godliness. So I'm going to say one more time, what got passed in 1911 through 1918 decreed that specified behaviors, health, and vocational training were the central goals of education, not mental development, not character, not godliness. Fitzgerald wrote she could not find a name for the ideology that lies behind these texts. The way they handle history, for instance, is not history at all, but a catechism of American socialist realism. More than once she notes, quote, actual hostility to the notion of intellectual training. Passion in partnership with impatience for debate is one good sign of the presence of true belief. The most visible clue to the degree true belief was at work in mass schooling in the early decades of this century is the National Education Association's 1918 policy document. Written entirely in the strangely narcotic diction and syntax of official pedagogy, which makes it almost impenetrable to outsiders, Cardinal Principles announced a new, de-intellectualized curriculum to replace the famous recipe for high goals and standards laid out 3 decades earlier by the legendary Committee of 10, which declared the purpose of all education to be the training of the mind. This new document contradicted its predecessor. In a condemnation worth repeating, it accused that older testament of forcing impossible intellectual ambitions on common children, of turning their empty heads, giving them, quote, false ideas of culture. The weight of such statements, full of assumption and implication, cannot easily be felt through its abstract language, but if you recognize that its language conceals a mandate for the mass dumbing down of young Americans, then some understanding of the magnitude of the successful political coup which had occurred comes through to penetrate the fog. The reputation of the Committee of 10 was reinforced by a companion report proposing that history, economics, and geography be dropped at once. Did you hear that? The reputation of the Committee of 10 was reinforced by a companion report. So these NEA reports that came and just wiped out the Committee of 10, they also proposed that history, economics, and geography be dropped at once. And if you listen to my lecture on money, you will understand, I mean, hopefully you already do, but you will understand indefinitely why those three things had to leave. Specifically, the history of banking, the history of money. When you want to understand why different places are controlled by different people, that inevitably takes you to history and money. History and money, history and money, history and money. Follow the money when you have no other leads. What cardinal principles gave proof of was that stage one of a silent revolution in American society was complete. Children can now be taught anything or even taught nothing in the part-time prisons of schooling. And there was little any individual could do about it. Local challenges could be turned back, local challengers demonized and marginalized just by waiving the national standards of cardinal principles as proof of one's legitimacy. Venal motives, as well as ideological ones, were served by the comprehensive makeover of schooling, and palms incidentally greased in the transition soon found themselves defending it for their own material advantage. Schools quickly became the largest jobs project in the country, an enormous contractor for goods and services, one always willing to pay top dollar for bottom shelf merchandise in a dramatic reversal of economic theory. There are no necessary economies in large-scale purchasing. School is proof of that. Cardinal principles assured mass production technocrats they would not have to deal with intolerable numbers of independent thinkers. Thinkers stuffed with dangerous historical comparisons, who understood economics, who understood the Federal Reserve, who had insight into human nature through literary studies, who were made stoical or census-resistant by philosophy and religion, and given confidence and competence through liberal doses of duty, responsibility, and experience. The appearance of cardinal principles signaled the triumph of forces which had been working since the 1890s to break the hold of complex reading, debate, and writing as the common heritage of children reared in America. Like the resourcefulness and rigors of character that small farming conveyed, complex and active literacy produces a kind of character antagonistic to hierarchical, expert-driven, class-based society. As the nature of American society was moved deliberately in this direction, forges upon which a different kind of American had been hammered were eliminated. We see this process nearly complete in the presentation of cardinal principles. We always knew the truth in America, that almost everyone can learn almost anything or be almost anything. But the problem with that insight is that it can't coexist with any known form of modern social ordering. Each species of true belief expresses some social vision or another, some holy way to arrange relationships, times, values, etc., in order to drive toward a settlement of great question. Why are we alive? The trouble with a society which encourages argument, as America's did until the mid-20th century, is that there is no foreseeable end to the argument. No way to lock the door and announce that your side has finally won. No certainty. School has the troubles and social problems of everywhere. Its kids are lonely in a crowd, misunderstood, beyond understanding, and seeking love, as the song says, in all the wrong places. Once intact families, tightly knit neighborhoods, and stay-at-home mothers enforce community norms. Now the world is the mall, mothers work, and community exists in daytime television and online chat rooms. Oh boy, okay, so that was the end of the book. Yeah, it's pretty intense. You might be feeling a lot of different emotions right now. Anger might be like one of the most prevalent, because I mean, you went through it, like I went through it, or you're in it right now. God, I can't imagine hearing all this if you're in it. So it brings us to a position where there's two different avenues of action leading from here. If you're an adult listening to this, and if you either have kids or you're gonna have kids in the future, do not send them to school. Please do not send them to school. You have the power to teach your kid everything to be so successful. And if not you, family members and community members near you. So I'll start with the adults that have kids right now. If you're an adult that has a kid right now, one of two things are happening. Your kid's either at school with a mask on, being pumped full of propaganda and fear, or your kid's sitting in front of a computer for possibly 8 hours a day, watching some dude talk about mindless mechanics. If you have a job, you don't have to give up the job to teach your kid. There's definitely going to need to be some maneuvering. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but there's definitely steps you can take. If you were to give your child 3 days of concentrated time to teach them and work with them, it's infinitely more than weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of public school could give. It's infinitely more. Degrees don't matter. School doesn't matter. What matters is experience and knowledge. If enough parents pull their kids out of school, the schools are going to collapse. They're collapsing whether or not you pull your kids out. But if you want to help your kids, you're going to pull them out before they collapse. So if you're an adult listening to this and you have a kid, or if you don't have a kid, just close your eyes and just imagine yourself sitting on that school bus, which is a prison bus. If you haven't realized, school buses and prison buses, they use the same bus. So close your eyes. Imagine yourself sitting on that prison bus, going into a prison camp, and just thinking, this is normal. This is what everyone tells me I have to do. And so there's literally no other choices. There's another choice. There's another choice. You don't have to send your kids to prison camps. They're already collapsing. Your kid's in the other room watching some idiot talk about simple ideas but making them ridiculously complex so your kid can't even understand them. Just wasting your kid's time. Your kid's time is so precious. It's so important. And they're just wasting it. I promise you can teach your kid better. I promise. If you're not in a position to financially take just 3 days away from work to work with your kid, if you're not in a position to do that, please listen to my lecture on finances. It's free. It's the same as one 10-hour workday. You can sit down and listen to it, and you'll know more about money and investing than you ever have, because you were lied to for so long. And 12 months after listening to this and the lecture on money, I promise you'll have so much abundance. You and your kid, you can actually live together. You can live with your children. Rather than just work with them, you can live with them. If you're a kid listening to this, please give it to your parents. Please let your parents hear this. If they don't listen, send it to your parents' friends. Send it to anyone you can. Just get the word out there that you're going into prison. You don't have to. You don't have to. You can fight. You don't have to fight with your fists. You can use words. You can fight with your voice, with your soul. If you're a kid listening to this and you have no other options, no other choices, please listen to my lecture on money. If I had listened to what I created about money when I was in high school, I'd be a multimillionaire right now. I'm already a millionaire. I'm already on my way. I have all the wealth I could ever need inside of me. And so that means those resources are coming imminently to match it. But if you're a young person right now, listen to this. Read. Just read. Read and educate yourself. Don't go to school. Like, if you're forced to continue to go to school, that's fine. Just, who cares about it? Teach yourself. I was a kid who got straight A's in school. I was terrified of getting anything lower. I thought it was a sin. I thought it was evil. I hope after listening to this that you understand what you are in is evil. It's okay if you're not great at it. It's okay if you hate it. You should. It's not bad that you wake up and hate going to school every morning. That's amazing. If you wake up and you hate going to school, that's beautiful. Act on it. Use that rage, use that anger, and create. Create for yourself and for your family, and educate. Educate and create. Create and educate. Because if enough people create and educate, we can change the world. The world was changed by kids. Kids are the ones that change the world. That's the thing. We're all kids. The kids that are coming in right now, though, are more in touch with balance and harmony and the true nature of ourselves. So listen to the kids. Listen to kids. Listen to them, please. Listen to history. Listen to our real history. In no way did I ever mean to attack any teachers, because you guys got scammed too. It's not your fault. I blame no teacher. So at the very least, I hope after listening to this, it allows you to realize that you can think for yourself. You can, and it's beautiful. You're a genius. I promise you're all geniuses. You just have to remember it. You just need to remember who you are and what you're capable of. Because we can actually do anything. And if we can do anything, let's help everyone else do anything. So if you're a kid listening to this, tell your parents about it. Listen to my lecture on finances. It'll help you insurmountably. If you're an adult listening to this, please take heed of these words and educate your children yourself. Give them everything you have, because they're the future. And if money's an issue, please, please, please listen to my lecture on finances. I love you all so much. I can't wait to see and hear and talk to you all.
So one last thing that actually just presented itself to me as I was finishing editing this talk. Guys, it's the most beautiful thing, like, so far that we've talked about. Look up Unschool. If you're a parent, if you're a student right now, go on Google and just search Unschool. Unschool. You can search unschooling. Guys, people are already waking up. The answers are out there. The difference between unschooling and traditional homeschooling uses the school's curriculum, but just through a parent. Unschooling, guys, it does everything that we've been talking about the last 3 hours. It believes that kids have the ability to follow their passions, to follow their hearts, and they can teach themselves and learn everything they need to. And legally, guys, this is legal in all 50 states. So that's all I'm going to say about it right now. Just go to unschool.com, read everything you can about it. And it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Best of luck out there. I promise you can do it. I promise you can do it. I promise.